Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Introverted in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 46, The Murdered Innocence of Souls. The laughter died out as Fu suddenly lurched over, falling with her knees against the branch as she coughed up blood. Baku was at her side in a moment, but as her eyes widened in fear, deep gashes began to appear all over her body. Large cuts, perforations, the cracking noise of bones breaking all echoed as her body crumpled down, still breathing, but undoubtedly out of commission. Baku had a moment to think, and he came to a single conclusion. It couldn't be a poison. He barely got down, avoiding the spinning scythe that cut the downpour of rain once more. With his instincts screaming for him to run, he pounced behind the scythe in question, landing on the same branch as his attacker. A white-haired man wearing a tattered and frayed cloak that once depicted clouds of red stood in the middle of a strange circle, his entire body black except for some white lines that resembled a skeleton. He looked as if he had overused the war paint, and his maddening smile was something that sent shudders down Naruto's spine. Jashin-sama saw fit to grant me a boon today, he spoke in hushed tones. Tujin Hiraki, at the price of one. Surely, this is a sign. Glory to Jashin. The rain kept on falling as Baku exhaled slowly. He held his Yoroi Toshi at the ready as he watched the man spin his three-blade scythe in his hand nimbly and with grace. He positioned his tanto perpendicular to his body, taking on a stance as his cloak floated behind him because of the wind of the rainstorm. There was no use trying to hide. Immediately the shinobi's eyes were on him, their dark maddening gaze seemed to be analyzing everything he did. The enemy smiled wickedly, licking his lips as if in anticipation of a great fight. Ah, come then, if you aren't scared of me. For I am Haiden, first cultist of Jashin. Beneath his gaze of death and destruction, I will walk forth. Come then. Come and suffer by my hand. Chakra slowly formed to reinforce his Yoroi Toshi, the light blue sheen covering the blade and extending its range. The longer the range of a weapon was, the easier to block an attack. Baku charged ahead with a Kage Bunshin, using the distraction of the charge to hide his main body on the treetop above as the man twisted his scythe and launched it, letting it spin wildly in the air just enough to get the shadow clone by the side of the face before he could even act. This was another Umbu rank shinobi or more, because he hadn't seen the attack connect, and it had all looked like a blur. He was right in placing this under the clauses of Kage Bunshin required for survival. The fact the man had gone for the face of his Kage Bunshin, however, it spoke volumes. The man knew that had been a clone, so he knew the real Naruto was still hiding somewhere. He swapped positions on the higher tree branches, as he formed a hand seal. 5 seconds, and a horde of Naruto clones jumped down from above and the sides, their tanto ready to fight the enemy's scythe. The man screamed as he spun his scythe back and forth, like a sort of yo-yo that brought death and destruction as it mercilessly tore through Bunshins one after the other. Really? This is an affront to Jashin. Unbeliever. Miscreant. Unfaithful. As smoke came from the puffed bodies, more appeared to take their spot. Naruto hissed as he remembered, as he saw with his own eyes the speed of the man. The scythe connected with a chain made of barbed wire, and the enemy used it with ease to protect himself by guiding it with his own chakra. His movements were fast, and he could barely see them to begin with, but even after suffering through his pattern of attacks, he still couldn't see. He had to work on instincts alone, because with anything less, with any distraction, any second of catching breath, the man would attack him, and he would kill him. Had this been a real fight, he would have lost 300 allied shinobi in the first 5 minutes. One of his clones got close enough to nick at his cloak, before the man's legs came into the fray and smashed his face down. Taijutsu was really out of the question, and Tanto Jitsu didn't have enough range even when enhanced with his chakra. The man spun the scythe around him repeatedly, as if he could not become tired at all. He even had the beginning of a bored look on his face, as his smile came down lightly. I am the chosen of Jashin. I am his trustworthy servant. Nothing you can do, no army you can bring, no one can defeat me. I am Haiden, his first priest. Naruto snarled and gave the order, and soon the attackers that had been occupying him dispersed, leaving the place to 50 hand seals, finished clones that spewed out from their mouths blades of wind. At the same time, they launched their swords imbued with fire chakra. The wind passed through the burning chakra blades, and soon it became a volley of deadly pale blue swords, the majority of which struck their target, setting him ablaze. The blades that the man parried pierced the branch and began a small fire, which quickly began to consume through the wet wood and sparked black plumes of acrid smoke. The man screamed as the blades that had hit him dispersed in smoke, soon followed by the clones that had launched them. Naruto breathed deeply as his nose took in the smell of charred flesh and pungent burning resin. The man fell dead on the ground, his body still and burned to a crisp. There was no way he'd stand back up from that. Carefully, he jumped down from his hiding spot and turned to look at his sensei's battle. Wait, why was Ryazetsu fighting against? A sharp pain struck and pierced him thrice in the back as blood escaped his mouth copiously as he screamed. The next moment his eyes widened in shock as he watched the charred body of his opponent slowly stand up from where it had fallen, his arm extended, having thrown the scythe at his back and the charred skin rebuilding itself from sheer nothingness. With his burnt face and hollow eyes that slowly reformed, he snarled and hissed for a while, before his vocal cords actually returned within his throat. Jashin grants me strength. The man was a monster. He was an S rank. That technique, whatever it was, Naruto's eyes were wide as the man pulled to get the scythe back, and he screamed once more as the blades ripped through his flesh and left his body. The moment the enemy pulled the scythe from the back of Naruto, Baku coughed and fell face down on the branch, his mask cracked. The shinobi's skin had turned white from black, and as the S-rank shinobi moved closer, Naruto saw his face for a brief moment. He had medium-length silver hair that was slicked back and distinctive purple eyes, the Yogaku or forehead protector slung over his neck with a slash. The man twirled his scythe and brought the blades up to his face, before licking the blood and smirking. Very good, he grinned, before drawing a circle and a triangle on the spot he was, recreating the strange symbol he had stood on before. It is time, for Jashin. His skin then turned black, like Naruto had seen earlier. The white war paint now appeared clearer to him, who saw a skeleton depicted with the lines. The skeleton seemed to be cackling at him, as the shinobi plunged his scythe through the bottom of the pole into his stomach, earning a terrifying scream from Naruto, who felt the blow and saw the injury appear, even as he shuddered trying to regain his footing. His vision grew dimmer by the moment, and as he coughed out blood, he wondered where his sand was. The humidity and the rain still falling probably held it off, and he was way above the ground for it to work. Then again, he had burnt the man and he hadn't died. Was he immortal? Or maybe, did he have some sort of regeneration? He pressed his thumb against his wound, grounding his teeth as he watched the S-rank shinobi slowly savor every wound he made on his body that reflected on his. The scythe spun as the missing nin readied to wound his own arm, when Naruto's hand slammed against the branch he stood on. Chakra poured out of his body, as the force of desperation forced him to resort to a summon. I call thee forth, Hajwashi, bringer of dark omens. I pay your price, and together, we shall feast. With a terrifying gust of wind and smoke, the missing nin flew away from his own circle as the branch cracked and splintered. Blades of wind snapped the wood, tearing apart the tree, which crashed against another one. The thunder came from the sky as the lightning struck a nearby top, setting it on fire. Naruto's feet now stood firmly on the back of the leader of the carrion eaters, the giant vulture Hajwashi. Its curved beak was crooked in a smile as it opened its wings mightily and floated away from the fallen tree. The missing nin jumped on the tree's trunk, quickly scampering to rise up with his scythe in tow. His skin was once more white. Jashin will have you, heathen. The S-rank screamed as he twisted his entire body and sent the scythe to slam further up a nearby tree, using it as an impromptu grappling hook to jump higher in the air and reach him. Let us feast. Hajwashi shrieked to the air as he flew beyond the top of the trees, flapping his majestic and powerful raven wings, and taking away with him the thinner branches along his path. He cawed to the heavens, and the sky answered back as black murder of crows rose from the trees. The eyes of the vulture looked down upon the ground, his nose smelling the blood of his summoner on his back. The wind blew harshly over Naruto's face, as the hail did not seem to abate at all. The feathers of the Lord of the Carrion Eaters were shiny and looked like polished alabaster, and he could feel beneath his feet every single powerful thrust of the muscles that held the vulture aloft. The beady eyes of Hajwashi turned to gaze at him, their shine unmistakable. Who is it that we shall feast upon together, summoner? He asked. Haiden of Yogakur, he croaked out. His eyes looked down to the thick sprawling forest. He's an S-rank shinobi. He uses a scythe, and if he gets your blood, he does something strange. I tried burning him, but he just regenerates. Then let us eat until he can heal no more, Hajiwashi shrieked them as he spun in midair, before beginning a descent so fast everything looked like a blur to Naruto, who hung with his feet on the back of the giant bird. The murder of crows that had formed around him squawked as it sped to keep up with their impromptu flock leader. Soon bigger wings belonging to hawks and owls, and other carrion eaters who had come to answer the call of their lord joined them. A tornado of dark beaks and wings passed through the missing nin, who had stopped climbing the tree and was standing with his scythe ready on one of the taller branches. Jashin! Grant me strength! He roared as he spun the scythe in front of him, cutting through the flock as the feathers seemed to stick to his body, matted of blood and bird entrails. Just as with the cage bunshin, the birds attacked with no care for their lives, but differently from them the feathers stuck to the skin of the man, starting to erode his speed. When Haiden realized that, he tried to move, but it was too late. This did not stop the assault of the other birds, in fact, which instead redoubled their efforts upon seeing he was slowly coming to a halt with his movements. Hajiwashi flew down last, slamming his powerful beak against the scythe and earning a shower of sparks as Naruto jumped down from his back with his Yoroi Toshi in hand and ready to attack. The Yoroi Toshi shone with wind and fire, the pale blue fire that burnt brightly if for an instant as it suddenly connected with the barbed wire that kept the scythe attached to the enemy. It sliced through it, forming a burning and sizzling gash of charred flesh as the S-rank shinobi moved slightly backwards. It was enough to form a deep gash that burned of blue flames. You think this is enough, heathen? Jashin grants me eternal life. Nothing you can do will ever stop me. It was then that the beak of Hajiwashi came down again sharply, forcing Haiden to parry it as Naruto pushed through with his own weapon. The raven wings of the giant vulture obscured the view around the two fighters, creating a sort of tight and impromptu arena where the light came in only from above, and only from Haiden's back. Naruto was in the shadows, attacking an enemy he could easily see with the help of the powerful pecking of the giant vulture. The sizzling of charred flesh increased as Naruto nicked an arm, then the sides. Saliva began to drool down from Hajiwashi's mouth that made the scythe itself sizzle, as it was apparently acidic in nature, the smell probably enticing the vulture to finish this and start gobbling up the enemy. Let go of my scythe, you fucking bird! Haiden then screamed as the scythe suddenly snapped in two. The missing nin from Yugakure could sweat that the vulture was grinning through his eyes as he watched the scythe break. He could swear he could hear the tongue move through the animal's beak like someone waiting to eat a roast. The flash of pale blue fire that cut through his head, on the other hand, that he didn't have to imagine. The head of the enemy shinobi rolled away from the body and tumbled on the ground, as Hajiwashi bit down on the remains of the scythe and flapped his wings, sending inadvertently gusts of winds over the spot Naruto stood. The vulture tore the broken bit with the blades of the scythe away from the headless body, before letting it fly and stick against the surface of a nearby tree. The corpse of the enemy shinobi himself was pushed beyond the edge of the branch, to fall on the ground with a sickening crunch. It makes the bones tender, he chuckled with a wicked grin. Come, summoner, we have to feast. He then caught as he descended together with his smaller brethren towards the corpse. Naruto hesitated for a moment, before sharply taking in air and jumping down, to land carefully near the flock of ravens. The man looked pretty much dead now, beheaded and all. Jashin! Fuck you in the name of Jashin! Fucker! Jashin mother! The noise came from a corner of the meadow, where the head was standing spewing curses one after the other. Naruto was startled. How the hell was that thing still alive? Stop eating my body, you Jashin damned birds! Stop! Stop it! As Haiden screamed, Hajiwashi brought up its blood-encrusted beak and looked at him. At least the flesh eaten from the beheaded corpse wasn't regenerating, which meant it probably was the head the source of it all. Make way! He called to the smaller crows, who squawked back as they flew to the nearby branches, for our summoner must feast with us. Naruto coughed as he stumbled forward, eyed by the multitude of crows. He wanted to point out that Nico was being attacked nearby, but in the moment, he had the fleeting thought that it was more of a ritualistic thing that had to be done than a mere asking him to eat a corpse. He unclasped his mask, cracked and half broken, and let it fall on the ground. His blue eyes looked muddied by the weight of his sins, as deep rings of dark purple clung to them. His whiskers stood pronounced and actual gashes of red fur sprouted from them. He could feel his skin slowly knit itself to a close, as he tasted the bitter taste of blood still in his mouth. He could hear the rattling of the chains deep within himself, but he didn't care. This was something he had to do, for he had called forth the head of the summons, and he would partake in their feast. Calmly, he dropped down on one knee near the mutilated body of the Jashinist. He wasn't moving. Separating the head probably worked then, and the bits eaten, they did not reform, so he had been right. He slowly pushed his hands in the innards of Haydn's body, and as he heard the cacophony of crows reach to the skies followed by the cawing of Hajwashi himself, he shared the first banquet of flesh with his summons. At the same time, in the nearby camp, a three-way fight was devolving into a scene of death and destruction. Yamato ducked beneath the thunderbolts that launched from Kakuzu's hands, as Ryazetsu's hand seals seemed to be forming fire bells that floated in the air before detonating. He was receiving no help from Naruto wherever he was, which meant that either they took him out earlier or there was a partner. He opted for the latter, and that was confirmed when he heard the sound of Naruto's technique being unleashed further away. He erected a wall of wooden tendrils to guard against a fire attack that suddenly billowed because of the wind that increased its power. Ryazetsu emerged first through the crack in the wood wall, sword in hand, as she tried to stab him. He sidestepped the attack and threw a punch of his own. She ducked below, slashing her blade diagonally and forcing him to take a step back. He then moved ahead, slamming his right fist against her chest and gripping on the fabric of her vest. Tendrils of wood erupted from the ground, piercing her feet then, before he silenced her permanently with a branch made of wood that sprouted from his hand holding on her vest, which pierced her through it as if it were a deadly steel lance. In that instant, Kakuzu struck with strength against his sides, shattering his left arm and outright tearing it off. As he swiftly substituted with a Mokuton Bunshin, holding on to the stump that was his arm and which he slowly covered in wood to avoid bleeding out, he breathed hard, biting down on the screams he wanted to make. He knew he had lost. The moment a shinobi was wounded, he began to panic, or if he didn't panic, he still would bleed out. He could withstand the pain and he could avoid bleeding out immediately, but holding on to the stump of his arm and using his wood release to prevent blood loss, it would sap at his chakra. He couldn't run for long, and he doubted Naruto would be able to survive against Kakuzu on a one-on-one. He had been lucky to take out Ryazetsu. Without the Kunoichi, probably a spy for Akatsuki, he had held the hope he could run away and regroup with Naruto. Yet Kakuzu had sacrificed her to get in a nigh mortal blow on him. He gritted his teeth. He was low on chakra, pain and agony were slowly clouding his brain, and he needed a plan. He could misdirect Kakuzu long enough to land a crippling blow on the stitched man. The man knew more tricks than the Sandaime ever knew, but he could try. The time it took for him to come up with a plan, Kakuzu had already won. The stitched-up man didn't even break a sweat as he slowly stood to full height. He could hear the stitches from his leg slowly closing as one of the hearts he had on his back had slid down beneath it and through the ground. The who resembled Hashirama had been no match for him. He hadn't even needed to hold his breath at all. When he had fought Hashirama, the first Hokage had used pollens, poisons, techniques that had made the very ground rise to be his enemy. The first Hokage hadn't given him a single instant of time to think, a moment to regroup. Hashirama Senju had been a true shinobi, who was merciless and cunning. He considered it his own pride to have escaped him. Takigakuer hadn't seen it that way, but then again, that was their prerogatives. Rogue element, they had called him. To them, he had acted against orders, when they had insisted he was to complete the mission. This would be a sort of sweet revenge. Even though the was not of the same rank of Hashirama, it still was a good stand-in. Well, have any plans up your sleeve? He asked the Mokuton Bunshin. He knew the man had moved, trying to flank him. He wasn't even trying to run anymore, since he didn't have a chance if he did anyway. Can't I just leave with my colleague? Afraid not, he gruffly stated. Your colleague is ours to collect, and you, I'm killing you for pleasure. Yamato breathed once, deeply. He clenched his only hand and then he jumped from his hiding spot in the trunk of the tree. If he could get a good enough hit with his left arm now turned into an impromptu wooden spike, then everything would be. A white mask appeared covered in a strange amount of dark tendrils in front of him, and as the mouth opened, it unleashed a volley of wind blades. Yamato's last thought as the blade tore through his body. was that he had done his duty to Konoha until his last breath. A cage of wooden spikes erupted from the ground Kakuzu had stood on, as his mask tore apart the Mokuton Bunshin. The Mokuton Bunshin in front of him instead charged ahead, screaming as he slammed his wooden spike through the spot where his heart would be. Kakuzu's eyes locked with those of the Konoha shinobi who had the same bloodline as Hashirama, and he chuckled as he watched the face of the man morph into one of despair, as he could not remove his hand. The black tendrils that composed much of his body slowly slithered through his broken hand, through his bleeding wound, and kept on moving until they reached their objective. Kakuzu chuckled as he tore the heart out of the Konoha's nin still alive body, slowly evaluating it before smiling wickedly. He engulfed it, replacing the heart of the Sutan shinobi he had hunted down before as he discarded the rest of the man's corpse as if it were nothing more than a used tool. Yamato's body fell on the ground with a dull thud, his chest caved open and his heart missing. Carefully, he felt the chakra adjust to his body as with a single twitch and pulse of chakra, a tree sprouted next to him. Kakuzu smiled. He laughed aloud then, as he turned ready to gather the other two Jinhiriki and leave with that insufferable of his teammate. The downpour stopped precisely then as if on cue. In that precise instant, as the water slowly dribbled down the wet trunks and the leaves, Kakuzu's eyes caught the shining black feathers of the crows that hung on all the branches near him. He would have thought Itaka was nearby, if not for the vulture in front of him eyeing him as if he were some sort of delicacy to devour. A rotting body, preserved and aged. Its beak was literally oozing saliva. This summoner, he pleases us more and more. The vulture cawed with glee. Naruto Uzumaki stood with his mouth covered in blood, his breathing hard and ragged. He watched the carnage below him with a sort of cold indifference. He hadn't known Yamato that much. A few months spent walking or running together. He hadn't trusted the man considering the orders given to him and it didn't hurt at all. His death was meaningless to him. It shouldn't have, but it was. "Kid, I can't believe you got hidden," Kakuzu grumbled. "You know they'll fault it on me, right? You killed them?" he asked slowly. He could still feel the blood of Haiden on his tongue. The taste had been rich, like aged wine. The malice devoured had been creamy, as if he had been feasting not on flesh and bones, but on the very soul he held. All of his malice, his misery, he had eaten it, to let the soul go free of sins. So that was why. He could hear the chains rattle. Was the Kyuubi trying to break free? No, it felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it just felt different. "I killed the Hashirama brat," he replied with a shrug. "He did kill the woman though," the missing nin from Taki shook his head. "How about I take the Seven Tails Jinhiriki with me and we leave it at this? We weren't supposed to get you too." He looked towards Fu, who was now on the back of Hajiwashi where he had placed her, and then back to Kakuzu who hadn't moved. Therefore, his offer was actually serious, since had he wished to attack then, Naruto doubted he would have been able to dodge it. There was a moment of tense silence, before Naruto shook his head imperceptibly. "She stays with me," he replied. "You don't want to do this, kid," Kakuzu pointed out. "Trust me, Taki all but paid us to take her. They gave us your patrol route. Why do you think we knew where you were?" he said, annoyed. "Give her here and just go somewhere else. Moon Country is nice this time of the year, and they have casinos. So I should betray the village?" he asked in a slow controlled voice. "Look," Kakuzu replied. "You take her back to your village? Taki and Kusa will try to blame you for having killed everyone in Konoha for wishing to hold the Jinhiriki of the Nanabi for yourself. They'll secede, and Uegakuer will move in and place them under his own protectorate. Once that happens, they'll declare war on the Land of Fire to get the Jinhiriki back. Instead, if you let her go to Taki, we'll be taking her anyway later on. Really kid, you have no way of keeping the girl. Find someone else to stave your hormones on." Naruto ground his teeth. "Why deal at all then?" "Because I know your eyes kid," Kakuzu said. "I have the same. Fight for the village until you fail, then they'll discard you as a broken tool. That was my fate, and now look at me. I'm in this for the money, not for peace or war, or to change the world. Money is all I care for." The light of the moon illuminated the clearing, where the S-rank shinobi watched the jinhierarchy of the Kyuubi stand on the back of the king of his summons. Naruto had to decide. He really had no. Do you accept techniques as payment? He slowly asked. Kakuzu raised an eyebrow. I said, do you accept techniques as payment? There was another moment of silence. Kakuzu was actually considering the offer? Naruto couldn't believe it, but it had been a far stretch, yet. And what would you have for me? Kakuzu asked. A Konoha Kinjutsu. Naruto closed his eyes, and then opened them again with his hands in a cross-like pattern. Kage Bunshin. As a clone appeared next to Naruto, Kakuzu sharply inhaled. Oh. He chuckled. Ah. He began to laugh. Well done, kid, really, welcome to the world of shinobi then, of lies and deceits. He clapped his hands slowly, once, as if to prove a point. I applaud you. I had no idea you'd have the guts to propose something like that. He shook his head. However, that technique would be useless to me, due to reasons I will not tell you. Naruto swallowed heavily, before carefully commenting. What about the raised non? The technique of the Yondaime himself? Only a few know of it. Kakuzu closed his eyes. Yes, I could market that, if anything, I think I'd actually be the one gaining a lot out of it. The man chuckled as he opened his eyes again. You have yourself a deal. Naruto nodded and created a Kage Bunshin. In that moment, Kakuzu remarked. Open the scroll first, because you have a scroll of the technique, right? Naruto swallowed and nodded, unclasping the scroll from his vest's pouch and opening it. Now give it to your clone, and let him walk forward with it, the ink side directed towards me. If it's genuine, we'll finish the deal. This was outright betrayal to the village, but then again nobody knew he had such a scroll and he had already learned what he could from it. The Kage Bunshin grimaced and nodded, before jumping down and slowly walking forward. In that moment, Kakuzu peered with his eyes at the scroll's kanji and images. Yes, it looked genuine. Very well, he remarked. You can fly away. Hajiwashi did just that, taking with him both Fu and Naruto, who held tightly on with the jinhierarchy of the Nanabi in his arms. He swallowed the lump that was forming on the back of his throat as the powerful raven wings of the Lord of the Carrion Eaters brought him to safety. 5 minutes later, and the Kage Bunshin dispersed, delivering onto him a plethora of information. Don't go immediately, Kakuzu told him. First, seal the corpse of your sensei and his possessions, unless there is something of value you wish to keep on your person. In which case, use one of your lesser summons to hold onto it and carry it back to your real self. Naruto blinked. Why are you helping me? I know your eyes, kid, Kakuzu replied. You can hide them, you can claim it was a mistake or an error later on, but the moment you accepted to exchange this scroll, this technique, the moment you accepted the easy way out, that was the moment you truly became a shinobi. We don't fight for honor or some horse crap bullshit like loyalty. We're shinobi. We fight for money. We bleed and kill for money and power. I learned this a long time ago, and now I'll teach it to you. With money, you can't buy friends, but you can buy shinobi to kill your enemies. With money, you can't buy freedom, but you can buy shinobi to kill your jailers. With money, you can't buy love, but you can buy a shinobi to kill your rivals. Shinobi are creatures of greed and wants. We don't have a soul, we sold it to the devil. We don't have honor, we exchanged it for victory. We don't have darkness, we aren't evil. We simply are. Kakuzu took a small breath. We are not monsters, but shinobi. We are not evil demons, but shinobi. We are not heroes of justice or avengers, but shinobi. Shinobi. Many will tell you that we have the kanji for endure, because we endure, those are liars. We are shinobu, those who conceal themselves, who do things secretly, who steal, and yet, shinobu can also be considered as the two words for death and faith, or death and extend. We are those who have faith that death shall come, or those that extend death onto others. We have no peace of mind, no sin to which we will not lower ourselves, and of today, I can expect your bounty to rise, Naruto Uzumaki, or should I say Naruto Namikaze. He began to walk away. Do not betray my expectations, kid. When the time comes, and I will arrive to collect your bounty, I will demand a battle on Par with Hashirama's strength, only then, he whispered as he left, will I be satisfied. His clone had summoned a small crow to carry the scroll containing the rests of all the victims, as Naruto realized when said animal came flapping by. Even the head of Haiden had been sealed and delivered, and as the crow cawed to him, he opened his mouth, to let him feast on the bits of flesh that had stuck to his teeth. He didn't even find this disgusting anymore. He was a shinobi after all. Born of darkness. Tempered in blood. Bringer of pain. As the Nanobijin Hiraki moved in his arms, her wounds slowly healing, he truly didn't know what he was doing. He was returning to Konoha, but how would they actually take it? Would a war really be unleashed? He had to doubt it. If nothing happened to Fu, she would be able to explain the truth. And really, why would they change one protector for another? Orochimaru looked with indifference at the tank filled with water that was Suijutsu. The bloodline ninja was looking back at him with disdain, but he wouldn't care less. I need you to do something for me, Suijutsu, he calmly remarked. Fuck you, Suijutsu replied. Really, that was within normal parameters. Hebai? Push the purple button, he said to his assistant, who quickly obeyed. An electrical discharge ran through the water, making the Guman scream in pain. Push it again, just to be sure. Another scream. Stop it. You mad bastard. I take offense in that, Hebai, the red one if you'd please. Hey, wait, what is this yellow? No. Yuck. No, get me out of here. Where the hell, arg? It's piss. You motherfucking bastard. Now, Suijutsu, I loved my mother very much, he looked at Hebai. Would you kindly push the green button, Anko dear? Hebai obeyed immediately. The water slowly began to boil. Arg. All right. I give. Orochimaru-sama. Stop it. Orochimaru-sama. St. A tank of gas soon substituted what had been Suijutsu, which after pushing a pale blue button moved through a set of tubes all the way towards a small iron barrel that Hebai hastily closed a moment later at Orochimaru's orders. It's dark in here. Suijutsu remarked from within the barrel. Good, Orochimaru smiled as he patted Hebai on the head. Now let's go. We have to deliver a bloodline user to Kirigakure, so that their Mizukage might find true love and ignore him making a strike at Zabuza, Mamakai. He actually shook the metal barrel for a moment, as within Suijutsu began to curse loudly. Why didn't you say that sooner, you mad bastard? The sound of the water inside sloshing around made Orochimaru smirk. There was no need to waste time with petty details. Oh, and Anko? Well done, he said, turning his golden eyes towards his prized pupil, who nodded meekly. Hi, Orochimaru-sama. Sakura watched dispassionately as the Tora mask she had worn until then turned to dust. She had made her choice. She wasn't fit for Umbu work, she couldn't stomach it. They had let her go with the mere warning of never speaking of what she had done, and she left it at that. She trudged through the steps up to Naruto's apartment that she had decided to keep tidy and wait for his return. She had sold the bakery of her parents, but she had kept the house. Shinobi weren't taxed to begin with, so it wasn't as if she suddenly had to pay more than usual. Her emerald gaze lingered tiredly towards Naruto's bed. The clothes he had left behind, she had scattered around his sheets. She dropped her Chiyunin flak jacket on the ground and slowly made her way to the middle of them. They smelled of him, and that calmed her down. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the tiredness that was weighing down on her limbs slowly seep through. 8 months had passed, and still she hadn't heard from Naruto. She wasn't worried, but with every day she began to dread. Sure, it could be a year, rather than 8 months, but she missed Sai too, albeit slightly less. She embraced firmly one of Naruto's shirts to her chest, and then contentedly fell asleep, with a small smile on her face. The door of Naruto's apartment opened quietly, as a blood-soaked figure stepped inside. Sakura's eyes opened immediately. She sniffed the air, before narrowing her gaze and steeling her resolve, as she deftly and quietly jumped down from the sheets and crouched. Someone was inside the house. And that someone reeked of blood. Carefully she pried open the door of his bedroom, her gaze going to the other open door in the apartment. The one of the bathroom was slightly ajar, and from where she heard the sounds of someone turning on the water. Her breath hitched. Could he have? She quickly spun around and looked at the state his room was in. She brought both hands to her face and took a deep calming breath, before quickly dashing around placing the shirts and the trousers back in their places, turning crimson at the sight of a couple of underwear. What had she been thinking? He was going to think she was a pervert, that was what. She'd blame Sai. Yes, Shannaro. He was always acting like a pervert, it felt right to return the favor. She nervously ended up sitting at the wood chair of the table in the kitchenette, her hands clasped firmly against her thighs. Today was the day Naruto would tell her if he loved her or not. Her heart was already beating furiously. Her cheeks were red. And as the figure emerged from the steam of the bathroom. Chapter 47, The Realization of the Rotten World. Baku watched the form of Fu stir, as Hajiwashi slowly lowered in altitude at the border with Konoha. Flapping its majestic wings, the vulture landed in a clearing in the midst of a forest. Naruto jumped down, holding Fu with his own arms and cradling her lithe body as if she were a child. He nodded to his summon, who smiled, and opened his wings one last time, before completely hiding his body with them and disappearing in a twirl of dark feathers. Naruto blinked. He would ask the vulture how he managed to make such a stylish disappearance later. As it was, he was tired enough that he simply sliced a couple of branches from the nearby trees and hoisted Fu up with him. He lowered her with her back against the tree's trunk on one of the thickest branches, then, using the smaller ones as a makeshift camouflage. Grabbing the spare sheets, he huddled closer to the sleeping Jinchuriki of the Seven Tails, and with her head drooping over his chest, he supposed it was instinct he fell asleep. Rattling chains met his eyes as he watched the water around the two Baijuyo tied together evaporate slowly. The golden chains that held them both ensnared, and that gained strength from them, looked twisted with red and golden hooks. Where the two masses should have pressed together there was no longer a difference, it was as if the two chakra constructs were merging. He couldn't see where the skin of the rotten Ichibai began and where it merged with the matted crimson fur of the Kyuubi any longer. Slowly, the chains were constricting and forcing the two to bind together. Mito Uzumaki was nearby, watching over the chains with a careful and emotionless look. She turned her stern eyes to him, and her face softened slightly. "Nephew," she said calmly, her gaze returning then to the trapped demons. "What brings you here?" "I had a question," he whispered as he walked forward, his gaze fixed on one of the crimson eyes of the Kyuubi. The Kyuubi looked back at Naruto with a strange glaze over his eyes, not of hate, or of respect. It was mostly of sadness, as if whatever thing had to happen had just gone by. "Can you set me free? One day, you will wake up and see the truth as I see it. That day, you will realize that my words are the only truth in the world. That moment, that precise instant, you will come to me again and you will ask me, set me free, and I will answer you, rest assured, that to set you free you will have to pay me." "Nephew." Mito's face was perplexed as Naruto ignored her, walking closer to where the giant fox's snout was. He looked at the rattling chains, and then at the crimson eyes of the beast. "You knew all of this would happen, didn't you? You are the bearer of all malice, so all plans of evil flow in you. Tell me, Kurama. Is there no peace in the world? Is there no hope?" He murmured, stroking the fur near the nose of the Kyuubi, who was breathing slowly and deeply, releasing gushes of hot air. "Everyone is selfish in your eyes," he added then. "Even those who help others, they are selfish towards their souls." Naruto looked thoughtful, as he gave a pat on the side of the Kyuubi's face. "I understand now what you were trying to tell me. I understand what you meant back then with shackles and chains. You were just looking out for me, weren't you?" Naruto shook his head slowly. "Your words, back then. I should have listened," he admitted then. He chuckled bitterly. "I should have listened." He repeated that as he turned to leave. The Kyuubi did nothing but stare at him, yet there was no need for words. You can hide your head beneath the sand, you can close your eyes and press a hand to your mouth, but in the end, truth is inevitable. "I know it means nothing," he croaked as he left. "But, I'm sorry," and with a bow, Naruto left. His eyes opened to the curious golden ones of Fu, who was staring at him with concentration. He was without a mask, something which he would have to remedy, and as he looked back at the Jin hierarchy of the Seven Tails, he really had no idea what he was going to do. She took the decision out of his hands, because her lips crashed down against his roughly, as her tongue snaked inside his mouth. He widened his eyes for a fraction, as he felt her hands roam around his body to remove his vest and reach for his chest frantically. There was a moment of silence as Fu detached her lips from his, her breathing hard and her gaze still fixed on him. He swallowed nervously, as he realized the girl was catching her breath slowly. "You saved me," she whispered with a cracked voice. Her hands remained on his naked chest. "Thank you," there were tears in her eyes. "Eat me, please," she asked then slowly, nuzzling her face against the side of his neck, nibbling on it and making him groan, not in pain, however. I mean. He swallowed once more. His breathing grew ragged. "Let's eat together." Her voice was so filled with despair. How could he ignore her? How could he ignore her misery? He could not. He truly couldn't. He grabbed her by the shoulders roughly and pushed her to his side. She made an excited giggle as he felt something stir within him, something that... He stopped. He exhaled. He cupped the girl's cheek as he watched her cry. He kissed her back gently on the forehead, and then encircled her with his arms. He let her head recline against his bare chest, feeling her soft cheek and her fingers on his stomach. He carefully grabbed her roaming hand and held it close to his heart, before whispering. "It's all right," he croaked. We'll eat together a lot in Konoha, really?" She blinked once, looking at him. "Really?" "Yes," he nodded awkwardly. "I swear it, and I never go back on my promises." Fu made an awkward pause. Her face then lit up like a Christmas tree, and she smiled before nuzzling her cheek against his chest. Naruto sighed as the girl fell asleep a moment later. He had been so close to what? He looked at the darkening sky ahead of him. How was he going to explain this? Especially to Sakura, of all people? He shuddered then. He was so dead. Elsewhere, in an inn deeply settled within the land of water, Sai looked with a half-bored and half-surprised look at his master's recent work. Jiraiya of the Sun Inn cackled madly in a perfect imitation of a mad genius who had just found inspiration as he raised his hands to the skies with an art book completed. "It's alive!" Jiraiya screamed laughing outside. The Kiri weather had already produced lightning and thunder to suit the mood. "My ultimate work. ICHA Catch Some Tales, Ultra Sexy Edition with pictures included." Sai blinked. He was sure the dark foreboding chill that was settling in his spine wasn't for the written book, but for the artwork. He wondered why his master had asked him to draw a male protagonist with blonde hair and blue eyes and a female with tan skin and green hair. Then again, he supposed his master had such bouts of inspiration often. "Come, Sai," Jiraiya said with blood gushing down from his nose in copious rivers. "For tonight we call my editor, and tomorrow we dine in hell." His laughter grew madly as he headed over to the inn's concierge, to use the telephone. Sai followed quietly. He wondered if he hadn't unleashed a monster. No, actually, Sai wondered if he hadn't gifted to the Sun Inn a more powerful mean to rule the minds and the lower parts of men. What monster had he created? Sai's sweat dropped as he looked at himself in the mirror of the hallway. He hadn't changed much in a year if not for the addition of a red mantle over his shoulders to imitate his master somewhat with the color palette. It also helped to hide parchment and scrolls. As he watched, Jiraiya wobbled and yelled for sake. He shook his head once more. The man was truly a disgrace to shinobi around the world, and yet his antiques made his lips twitch funnily upwards. It was nice. He just couldn't wait to go back to Konoha now. Hinata Hyuga watched with uncaring and cold eyes the demons walking around. She kept her Byakugan active always, to be able to see who was a demon and who wasn't. If they twitched in a certain way, if they acted in another, every day, the range of her Byakugan grew. Now she could easily see through at least 5 blocks worth of distance from her room in the hospital where the demons had trapped her. She ignored them. The crying face of her sister was the most problematic, but she always managed it. Her father just sternly told her to stop this madness, but she wasn't the one mad, they were the ones who had been eaten by the demons. The nurse was kind enough to tell her that she had been right all along. In fact, the nurse had told her that Konoha brimmed with demons, and that they had already tried to save her once. Of course, she hadn't believed her immediately. Then she had remembered the way the Kumogakuer shinobi had tried to kidnap her, how it seemed strange that the High Ambassador of Kumo would go to such lengths with risking peace and whatnot. And then it became clear. Kumo had seen Konoha for the den of demons it was, and they had tried to save her by killing the demon who was supposed to take her place and eat her from the inside, and had done something to prevent another demon from sticking in her. It seemed so far-fetched, but it could only be the truth. The demons weren't eating her because they wanted her body to produce more offspring. Then, they'd use her children to make more demons. She had been righteously enraged at that. Soon, any day now, she would leave with the kind nurse lady. They had planned a great way to escape. She would go to a special side of the hospital, where normally mad people went. There, they'd camouflage her and then head out for a trip. She was sort of nervous. Leaving Konoha seemed so difficult, but the kind lady had told her there were more fighters of demons around the land of fire and her help was needed. Even if she couldn't walk, she could still help the rebels. Then, when the demons would be struck down, they'd hail her as a heroine. Hinata smiled at the thought. Soon she was going to leave Konoha. "I'll make you proud, Naruto-kun," she whispered to herself. "I'll never give up, just you wait." Shikamaru looked bored as he fiddled with his Chiryunin flak jacket. He eyed the rest of his team with a sigh, before nodding to himself. He could do this. Chuji was feasting as usual. Ami was showing off the white skin of her cleavage pretty well. She had taken to the arts of kunoichi, which were showing off skin and whoring, pretty well too. She was wearing a sort of long silk one-piece red dress with a floral golden motif. Her hair was long and reached her back to the shoulders. She was sweetly smiling towards Chuji, doing her best to hide the look of disgust on her face. Their sensei was taking another cigarette out and smoking on it lazily, as they watched the road in their boring day-long patrol on the road towards Konoha. All around the village were hidden tree houses, where shinobi stood guard every now and then for long days in one of the most boring examples of C-rank ever, in case some brigand or troublemaker came a bit too close to discovering the village. Very few civilians came to the village to outright ask for help. The majority remained in their towns all across the land of fire, and a courier ninja passed once every week to look through the requests, get half of the payment, and then send the missions back to the village through hawk mail. It wouldn't be a hidden village if everyone could find out where it was hidden. It was no use trying to hide it from other shinobi. Everyone knew the general location of any other hidden village with ease, since decades of spying and counter-spying made it possible. But the new generations of farmers, of citizens of the capital or of towns and cities, they didn't know, and they would keep up not knowing until the end of times. What a drag, Shikamaru snorted softly. I should have brought the shogi board. Asuma hummed his approval. This gives you time to think, the Sarutobi heir remarked offhand, about a lot of things. Like what? Shikamaru raised an eyebrow, his bored eyes lingering for a moment on his sensei's face. What to do, when to do it, how to do it, Asuma sighed. Some downtime never hurt anyone. Munch, Chuji muttered. You think? The Akimichi munched down once more. Everything will be fine. Ami raised an eyebrow. What about? I don't know, the boy shrugged, I just felt a chill. Asuma looked perplexedly towards his genin, before turning a thoughtful glance at the road. There was nothing for miles and miles, except maybe a slight sparkling thing at the horizon, which suddenly disappeared. He narrowed his eyes for a moment. It had looked like a sort of mirror of glass, but then again, why would a mirror of glass appear suddenly in the middle of a road and disappear afterwards? Chuji! Ami exclaimed angrily, snapping his thoughts back to the girl in question. Do you really have to always eat? You'd be sort of cute if you just stopped. Chuji frowned for a moment without munching before returning to his chips. Want a chip? No. Ami huffed. Why couldn't I remain with a hunk? Why did I have to be saddled with such a team of deadbeats and f? Shut it, Ino. Shikamaru barked back at the girl in question, whose eyes widened comically. Shikamaru groaned and clenched his fists for a moment, before sighing. The Nara could feel the gaze of his sensei on him, and swiftly looked outside once more. Sorry, Ami. Ah, I understand, Ami muttered, flicking a lock of her hair blonde now behind her ear. She bit on her lips carefully, looking aside too. Asuma sighed, and then rolled his eyes. He cleared his throat and commented. How about, when this boring mission is over, we all go for barbecue at Yakiniku? Yes. Sensei, you're the best. Chuji said first with glee, stopping his munching of chips for the moment. Shikamaru just kept on looking outside, exhaling. His eyes looked at the clouds, white, fluffy, some shaped like birds, other like houses or faces. It was as he was just about to reply with what a drag that his eyes caught the sight of a humongous flock of birds in the air. Was it migratory season already? He watched the black feathered birds fly high in the sky, without a care in the world. They passed high above them, and as he was about to turn and look inside the hut, he heard something drip down on the wooden ledge of the window. He looked surprised. There was a single crimson dot on the wood surface, now one that looked eerily like blood. Stupid birds, he mumbled as he moved to another corner of the tree house. Toby was not pleased. Itaka was beyond furious. Orochimaru was not on the land of sky. He was not in any of the Akatsuki bases and thus was officially off the radar. He was on a mission for pain. To attack the Snake Sunin, it required years of preparation to prepare the terrain, the land, every little detail had to be perfect. Sure, the Sharingan could probably work much better in containing the threat, but it would still be a tough battle because the Sunin never played fair at all. Toby was seething as he looked at the maps in Orochimaru's quarters in the land of the sky. The maps were probably a misdirection of some sort, knowing the Sunin. 2 points however stood on the map highlighted as secondary options. 2 points too many, as there were only 2 conspirators against him. Of course, Toby could claim being paranoid. There simply were 2 yellow points on a map, there really was no need to see things in it, except with Orochimaru. If Orochimaru drew a triangle on the dirt, there was a reason. If Orochimaru danced and sang in a bar, there was a reason. Orochimaru was a creature of logic beyond logic. As a shinobi looked underneath the underneath, he went beyond the call. He looked to the sides of the underneath of the beyond of the post past of the underneath, and each gaze was booby-trapped, each incorrect answer brought pain and death. Orochimaru was the most logical monster ever to live, and the most maddening example of madness. 1 point would send someone to the depths of Kirigakure, which was a suicide attempt for anyone, considering the rebellion finished and all. The other point however would send the individual to a certain star village. In one circumstance the mission was to sow chaos, in the other it was to steal a star. He could see the logic behind the first steps of Orochimaru's thoughts process. He, Toby, was the one who had controlled Yagura up until that moment. He could teleport to Kiri with ease, and if he sent Itaka to investigate the star village then he would split his forces. If the opposite happened, then Itaka would probably arrive to Kiri too late to stop the Snake Sunin. Orochimaru wanted him, Toby, to reach Kirigakure. There was no guarantee the Snake Sunin would be there. There was no way to predict how sowing chaos would work for the man's mind. He was the one who could provide support to Itaka. The opposite wasn't true. So it would be best to send Itaka where the Sunin was supposed to be, rather than where he wasn't. Once more, that brought forth the problem. Where had Orochimaru gone? He slammed his fist on the map, he looked at all the arrows, the dots, the lines, the scribbled notes, he shuddered and brought his hand beneath his mask to clench his temples and stave off the headache he was feeling. Orochimaru was somewhere in the elemental countries. He had taken his assistant with him. This wasn't a matter of where he was supposed to be, but of where he wasn't supposed to be. Toby's eyes snapped open immediately, as he looked towards the only piece of the map that the lines, the arrows, the question marks and the notes overlooked. Toby whispered the name softly, his index pointed trembling towards the small piece of land. Uzushiagakur, the land of whirlpools. Itaka snapped his eyes up from the map. Why? There is nothing. Nothing of interest and nothing of value, nothing at all that we could see and grasp, that would be the perfect place Orochimaru would not go, Toby whispered. Why there though? Why not Iwa, or AIM, or the land of iron? Why not the land of this or that? Isn't a meeting supposed to begin soon? The Hokage will send the Jinhiriki and his team as her escort guards, Toby remarked dryly. That's a given to show off. The other lands would be suitable, but they are also close to places of interest, too close for Orochimaru's taste probably. Probably. With Orochimaru you can never be certain, kid, Toby snapped back. Uzushio has nothing of interest, scavengers picked it dry years ago, but it just might hold a secret, one or two, that Orochimaru knows and we know not of. This is like chasing shadows, Itaki remarked. Chasing Cage, eh? Toby chuckled. For all circumstances, you might as well think of it like that. In the end, Obito Uchiha nodded and rolled the map. Itaki? You head towards the Land of Iron, where the Cage will hold their meeting, he muttered. I'll be going to Uzushiagakuer first. If I miss him there, you'll hold him off. Why the Land of Iron? Apparently, Orochimaru has his own agenda, Obito remarked dryly. But then again, who doesn't? With those cryptic words, he disappeared in the air. Itaki narrowed his eyes on the room for a moment more, and then stepped outside. His feet took him towards the edge of the Land of Sky, as he bit his thumb to call forth a crow and fly away. His gaze settled on the buildings that once had been but ruins, his eyes morphing into the Sheri-non. He memorized their layout, their position. He looked where their dormitories were, where the shinobi lived and where the civilians who worked in the pits of the land went. As the giant crow flew with him on his back, Itaka brought up the Akatsuki cloak to cover the lower side of his face. Blood slowly dripped down his mouth, as he held the scream in the back of his head. He would sacrifice everything, gladly, repeatedly. He would pay the ultimate sin again, if only peace. Why the men and women, why the shinobi, why could they not see? Could they not hear the screams of the dead? Could they not hear the laments of the widows? The tears of the children? Could they not hear them yell? Bloody stumps and muffled screams echoed in his head, as the blue sky seemed to mock him with his brightness. The face of Shisui, looking at him and smiling as he gave up his eye to him, was all he saw. Self-sacrifice. A nameless shinobi who protects peace within its shadow. That is a true shinobi. Even if the devil ate his soul at the end of his life, he would keep on offering it. Even if pain would be the only coin he'd receive, he would still keep on doing this. For he was a shinobi. And he would endure. Sakura's eyes snapped open, wide as saucers, as the figure that emerged from the bathroom was a naked Sasuke. She blinked. Suke. His eyes raven and shiny looked at her as he smiled. He even had the type of ABS she had only seen on those, for shinobi, magazines by chance only that were sold just so casually at the newspaper booth. He smiled at her with a perfect bright smile, and then swayed his hips as he walked forward to reach for her chin with his hand. I love you, my cherry blossom. She woke up suddenly, her eyes open as she looked around. Naruto's bed was still the same mess she had left it in, and she had apparently fallen asleep on his clothes once more. She sighed. What did Sasuke have to do now with her dreams? Naruto smelling things surrounded her, so why did she dream of Sasuke? It had been months since she had last seen the Uchiha. She knew he had moved to the Inyazuka compound for this or that reason, it wasn't specified, but why did her treacherous brain decide to dream of the Uchiha? Maybe it was because she had never really gone over her crush for him? No, that was silly. She shook her head firmly as she stretched and hopped off the bed, before heading out of his room and towards the bathroom. It was empty and unused. She sighed. It had all been a dream then. She actually wondered how Naruto would look like naked, and that made her cheeks heat and burn as if on fire. She wasn't a pervert, that was supposed to be size area. Sakura exited Naruto's apartment quietly, closing the door behind her. She proceeded to walk towards the gates, her second destination every time she could, and then settle on a bench nearby and wait. She watched the flickers of the Umbu who all had to pass through the gates rather than above them for security reasons, and the teams that left and returned. Standing in her Chiryunin jacket, sitting and with nothing more to do and even slightly sleepy from the previous power nap, she looked up to the skyboard. The clouds were white and fluffy, and they looked like marshmallows. The sun was already way beyond the summit, which meant she had skipped lunch. She shouldn't have, lunch was important. Her gaze went to the gates that were now closing. One more day had gone by without Naruto or Sai returning home. She sighed and brought a lock of her pink hair behind her right ear, as she huffed in displeasure. She was just about to leave when she saw the gates still in their closing. A pair of figures dashed in abruptly, leaving behind a trail of dust as they settled a few steps past the gates. She watched with curiosity the duo. One was Numbu with a Nico-like mask, while the other was a tanned girl holding onto a takigaku or forehead protector and with a red cylindrical object strapped to her back. Her ninja outfit consisted of a short sleeveless white midriff shirt with fishnet armor underneath, long white armlets, and fishnet shorts with a short white apron skirt over it. Her belly button showed terribly, just like the start of her hips. The Umbu instead flashed a set of recognizable signs that showed him as a member of the Konoha forces, which immediately eased up the guards at the gate. Sakura could smell the thick scent of blood on both of them, especially from the Nico figure. It was as they moved closer that she realized the Nico mask was actually mismatched. The lower half was that of the Baku mask, but the upper one instead belonged to a Nico, as if the mask had broken in the midst of the Umbu's mission and had been glued back to functionality with another. "We'll eat together again tonight, then," the girl with pale green hair said to the Umbu masked shinobi, as they passed right next to her. The Nico Baku nodded back. She frowned, but ignored the two in favor of going to Hebai. She would have dinner and then, probably, she'd go back to sleeping at Naruto's apartment. Naruto hadn't wanted to ignore Sakura. Yet he knew the girl would want an answer from him, and his mind had everything inside but a yes or a no. He was gritting his teeth behind his impromptu mask as he took the stairs up the Hokage Tower. Hajiwashi had left them at the border with Konoha, and he had run the rest of the way with Fu in tow. The girl had, well, it was no use speaking about it. She had been scared. He had been under pressure. Stupid things had happened. He wasn't going to make the same mistake again. Getting closer to someone who was broken, it never ended well, yet not getting closer ended worse. He jumped on a nearby rooftop, as Fu followed him like a puppy. He reached for the Hokage Tower and entered, taking the stairway that led him just outside the office. He could hear the cries of Tsunade-sama, the paperwork, and the snorting of Shizun, not now. He knocked thrice, before entering as the Hokage barked permission to come in. As he stepped inside, he looked at the dark-haired woman with long sleeves that had treated him at the hospital and at the blonde-haired Hokage. Shizun was holding a stack of papers, while the Godame was holding onto a bottle of sake. The amber-eyed Hokage raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall sending an Umbu out, on an escort mission." "Permission to remove the mask," Naruto said, with his voice tight. Tsunade sobered up immediately, before giving him a curt nod. She did not ask Fu to leave, because probably the Godame had already realized the mask had broken during the mission, and the girl had seen the face beneath it during the time it had taken the operative to repair it. When the mask came down, the fifth Hokage's eyes widened imperceptibly. "Where is Nico?" she asked carefully. "And you are supposed to be on patrol." "We were attacked," Naruto replied as he unclasped a set of scrolls from his chest. "He did not survive." Ryazetsu of Kyuzagakuer was a traitor working for Akatsuki, Tsunade sharply breathed at those words. "Kakuzu of Taki and Haiden of Yuga attacked us. Their objective was the capture of Fu, the Jinhuriki of the Nanabi." His eyes went to the green-haired girl, who made a cheerful smile and waved her hand. "Haiden engaged Fu and me in battle, and after he overpowered Fu, I managed to defeat him with my summons," Naruto droned on. "Kakuzu of Taki instead retreated by the time I went in to assist Nico with my summons. The man probably was wounded by the fight. I do not know of another reason why he would leave otherwise. The fact no Yamanaka would be able to verify if he was telling the truth was just a boon, really. I recovered the bodies of Ryazetsu, who I had seen attacking Nico, and my Umbu partner as well as Haiden's, well, talking and living head." Tsunade brought both eyebrows up exponentially. "Excuse me." Naruto shuddered as he carefully placed a scroll on the desk of the woman. He unrolled it fully, and then poured enough chakra in it to unseal the object within. A head with gray hair appeared, and soon began to talk. "You motherfucking heathens. Jashin will have your lives, you scumbags," and the smoke cleared. "Wow, titillady. I'll chew on them with my teeth if I." Tsunade sealed the head a second later, sporting an angry tick mark. "I see," she hissed. "Well, why did you not proceed to Takigakuer then?" I heard Kakuzu taunt Nico about it, he replied in a meek tone. My hearing is pretty sharp, he claimed Takigakuer actually paid Akatsuki to get rid of their jinhiriki. I could not risk it being true, and Kakuzu actually being there. Tsunade mulled it over for a moment, before giving a curt nod. You did well. I suppose you can give me a written report tomorrow. Concerning the jinhiriki of the Nanabi instead. Her eyes traveled to Fu, who fidgeted before clasping with her hesitant fingers the hem of the fabric of Naruto's cloak. You're responsible for her while in Konoha, understood? Naruto nodded firmly. Understood. Then you're dismissed, Tsunade exhaled. Now I'll have to call the council and send a message to Taki. As Naruto was already leaving, the voice of the Godame stopped him. Congratulations are in order, I suppose. He turned his cerulean gaze to the Godame, who merely smiled. The last message Nico sent was of his trust in your regards. He could feel his tongue fill with ashes. He swallowed the ashes together with the scream he would have liked to yell, and curtly nodded once more. I hereby enter you in the Umbu of Konoha, she smiled. When off duty, your rank will be Takubutsu Jounin until you pass the Jounin exam, which is held, well, that's part of the test too, Tsunade sighed. I'll make the appropriate change of permits for the library and the mission roster. More paperwork for me. She mumbled, and I expect you to be ready at the end of the week for an S-rank mission of protection and escort. His eyebrows both rose up. S-rank? Him? You have proven yourself, Naruto Uzumaki, Tsunade said, her eyes twinkling slightly. Or should I say Naruto Namikaze? He smiled briefly. I'll take whatever name you want me to take, he shrugged. For the mask. Your Baku identity was broken. Her eyes went to Fu, who just kept on shyly smiling towards her while keeping most of her body hidden by Naruto's frame. I'll give you a new mask before we depart. The S-rank mission is to escort me to the Cage Summit, which will take place in the Land of Iron, Tsunade replied. Her eyes locked with those of Fu once more, and it will be a good way to solve another problem. Understood. With that, Naruto left with Fu in tow. They stepped outside, him without his mask to cover his features and Fu still hesitating a bit as she followed him. She had a nasty scar on the side of her belly, where Haiden's scythe had sliced through her. The fact it hadn't become infected was probably because of the Nanabi. A normal shinobi would have made a trip to the hospital first, rather than report to the Hokage. There was silence as he stepped into his apartment, gesturing for Fu to hit the shower while he looked for some clean clothes in his room. He was surprised to find a veritable mess, as if someone had been sleeping on them. He shook his head and carefully folded a couple of them. Maybe he had forgotten about putting them back in the dresser after taking a change for the mission. He grabbed a long-sleeved shirt and a pair of gym shorts. He doubted Fu was used to boxers, but then again it was better than letting her go. The term was commando, was it? He stepped into the bathroom for but a moment, to drop her clothes, when he caught the glimpse of scars on the back of the tanned girl's skin. There were 7 scars, 3 per side and 1 perpendicular to them near her ass, well-toned ass, to say the least. She was humming as she washed herself, and even as heat rose to Naruto's cheeks, probably because of the steam and the hot water, he couldn't help but think there was a story behind those scars. Misery. It hurts. Please stop. No. They're my wings. Don't take away my wings, please. I'll be good. I just want to fly. Please, sob, mommy, please, not with the knife, it hurts. He flinched and recoiled as if struck, bringing a hand to his mouth to hold on to the bile that menaced to leave it. The images, he felt sick. He slowly left the bathroom, opening the fridge of the kitchen and giving an exasperated sigh at the contents. There was cup ramen. He supposed it made sense, he had stocked on long conservation food before departing, but really, the cupboards opened to reveal canned meat, canned fish, and canned peaches. He finally surrendered to the inevitable and placed the water to boil. Cup ramen would be good after he took his own shower. He had no intention whatsoever of going out to eat. He was tired physically and mentally after the ordeal, and a good night of rest was precisely what he had in mind. We never sparred, Fu said carefully as she skipped in the kitchen. But I know you're the strongest now, she mumbled as she settled down on the chair in front of him. The The sins of ignorance, Fu whispered. They're not pretty. They give insight, you know? Because, if you hit someone because you're ignorant, and you think they're a monster, then they tell me that he isn't, and that you're hitting him only because you're stupid. She bitterly smiled. I saw you enter and leave, my wings, right? You don't have to talk about it, he quietly replied. Really, it's not necessary. They were tiny things at first, she murmured. They began to hurt when I turned 11, and then one morning, there they were. She had a wistful look. I still remember learning how to fly in the first hour. I was so happy, I laughed so much, I flew through the sky, it was so pretty. There was a choked sound in her throat as her voice trailed off. Phew. My mom was scared, she hiccuped. Said I was turning into a monster, she trembled. So she grabbed the knife and I was so scared because I knew what she wanted to do to me, out of ignorance, I knew it. Her body was racked with sobs as she spoke. It was horrible. Naruto slowly circled the table, before engulfing in a hug the green-haired girl. He didn't say a word, but simply hummed and rocked her back and forth gently. She smelled of the same soap he used. She had showered in his bathroom after all. It's all right, he murmured. Now it's all right, you can't live in the past. Why yeah, she croaked out, you stink, Baku. My name's Naruto, he whispered back soothingly in her hair. I'll go and shower then. He was off after a few more seconds spent just hugging the trembling girl. Keep an eye on the water, he warned her as he went for his shower. The hot water was still there, and as he thoroughly washed and rinsed himself, he realized only halfway through that he had gone without clothes. He sighed and shook his now wet locks of hair. Where was his head? He stepped outside a few minutes later, to enter his room and grab his own clothes, with but a towel to cover his inchenches. It was as he was changing that he heard the sound of his door opening. He frowned for a moment. Who could it be? The moment he reached for the hallway, the steps hurried and soon joined with a sharp and glaring voice that was intimately familiar to him. Who the hell are you? Sakura screamed as her eyes settled on the tanned whore who was wearing her teammate's clothes. She had a hand to her kunao before she could even control herself, and as she watched her, she immediately trailed from her chest to. She was wearing Naruto's boxers? She could feel the pressure build in her temples as she furiously ground her teeth. She hadn't even gone that far. That whore of a foreigner. How dared she? She could see the faint glistening of water on the girl's hair, as if she had just used the shower. How dared she? She could feel the heat coming the bathroom, which meant it had been something done just slightly before. How dared she? She was wearing Naruto's clothes. How dared she? How dared she? Who the fuck are you? She snarled once more as the girl was simply looking at her with wide eyes, probably in fear. The bitch needed to learn not to mess with her, Shannaro. Sakura, and that was when Sakura's thoughts on punishing the bitch fell flat. She spun around as fast as a coiled whip could snap, and her wide eyes looked into Naruto's features for the first time in a year. He looked, well, he wasn't much different, but he was definitively taller and his whiskers were more pronounced. His eyes were those deep pools of cerulean she remembered, and his body if anything looked definitively leaner and muscly. And he was bare-chested, with his shirt hanging loosely on his shoulder. She stammered out as she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She dropped the kunao on the floor the next moment, and then looked like a trapped mouse between Naruto and tanned whore bitch. Her eyes widened even more, as the boy smiled and then widened his arms slightly. Hey, Sakura, I'm back. She began to sob as she launched herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. She could feel his hands gently caress her hair, and in that single moment, she felt truly happy. Then the smell of blood reached her nostrils. It was thick, as if it permeated every pore of Naruto's skin. His hands felt nice at first, but she could feel their natural callous nature, due to the strength of the grip used to plunge kunao in the body of the enemies. She knew she wasn't being hugged by some sort of super good-looking man or model, but by a shinobi, a tool for murder. Yet she couldn't really care about that. Oh, does she eat with us too? The tanned bitch whore asked then, with a sort of unnerving bright smile. It was then that Sakura's brain connected the dots. The bitch was wearing Naruto's clothes. The whore had finished showering. Naruto was wearing comfortable clothes and stood bare-chested. He had just finished showering. The foreigner was making herself at home, as if she owned the place. The bitch-tanned whore foreigner had his boxers on, She detached herself from Naruto firmly, and then her eyes locked onto him one more time. "Naruto?" she asked, sweetly while clenching her fists. "Who is she? Why is she here?" "I'm Fu." The girl replied first, brightly. "And I'm eating with Naruto." "Yes, I understood that," Sakura replied. "But why is she wearing your clothes?" "Hers were dirty, Sakura," Naruto muttered as he put on his shirt without any concern. It was a crime against nature to hide those abs, but then again Sakura had already burned their image to the back of her brain. "And why were they dirty?" "She was on patrol with me," Naruto shrugged. It didn't end well," he shook his head. "Can we talk about something else?" Sakura's face softened, before she slowly looked once more back to Fu. She had just finished eating at Hebai, and she didn't want to. Oh, to hell with that. She was going to intrude, and she was going to stay. There was no way a tanned bitch that came out of nowhere would steal her place next to Naruto. She had waited 1 year for a reply, and she was going to get it. "Yes," she nodded, firmly swallowing the nervousness in her throat. "I want an answer." Naruto's eyes shone. He had probably known she was going to ask him. Good. She clenched her fists and waited to hear of how he totally preferred tanned bitches with curves. She felt his right hand grab her chin and gently bring her eyes up to meet his, as his gaze was just so soft. "I can't swear true love, Sakura," he murmured. "I can't say yes or no," he shook his head. He felt bitter about the answer, she could feel it, and it tore her heart. I'm not ready for it. I can't see the white and the black, Sakura. It's all gray now," he bit his lips. "What if I say yes, and then it was no? What if I say no, and then it becomes yes? How can I say that I love you, if I don't even know the depths of the word? It's easy to scream I love you. It's easy to whisper it, or to say it again and again, but men who say it can be cheaters all the same. I don't want to say something I don't really mean, and I'm scared, because if I say it, and then this turns out to only be a fleeting thing, then." "I didn't waver once, Naruto," Sakura muttered, her eyes shining with glistening tears. "Why can't you just say it? Please? You had a year, Naruto. A year. Yes, or no? I think. The water's boiling." Fu screamed then like a child, interrupting the moment. "Well, the water's..." Naruto tried to say, but Sakura just gripped his shirt firmly with her hands. She wasn't going to let the moment end like this. She wanted an answer and she would get one. "You're not leaving my sight until you say yes or no, Naruto," she growled. "Yes or no?" His eyes widened as he watched the trembling form of Sakura screaming at him, in truth hiding her fright behind her eyes. Misery. Am I not good enough? Am I always second best? Why? Is it the bitch? Hatred. I will. Yes. Naruto screamed in the end, grabbing Sakura's wrists and pulling her close to him. Yes, he whispered softly afterwards, holding his lips inches away from hers. Yes, he muttered, his eyes locking with hers. Yes, he breathed out as he kissed her. Yes, he muttered as he held her tightly. Yes, he exhaled after the rough kisses. I love you, Sakura. Sakura promptly fainted, with blood gushing out of her nose. Naruto's sweat dropped. Fu just brought a hand to her mouth, before mumbling. Ah, is there enough water for 3? And somewhere else, in a land where trees did not live, where charred ashes and fire rained from the skies on a good day, a man prepared with a sinister smile for the most perfect gambit ever to be made as he crumbled a piece of paper in his hand. He was Unaki of Iwa, and his will was that of stone. Chapter 48, Tear Apart the Veil of Ignorance. Sakura was humming a happy note to herself, as she schemed across the second book of his collection. You are mine, En-chan. Mine. The incestuous and voluptuous sister, deformed into a mass of putrid and rotten flesh, screamed as chains made of rotten bones and marrow twisted and pulled at the screaming Enchan. A wicked grin and a maddening laughter showed the true face of twisted madness into the visage of what once had been Kei-chan, Enchan's sister. "Please Kei-chan. Return to your senses." Enchan whispered in fright. "You're my sister. This is wrong." "Yeah. Let Enchan go, you meanie." Kei-kan, the black snake, said from the cage he was in. Kei-chan just smiled and licked her lips as Enchan came closer and closer to her. The wall of the dark prison broke then, as a figure clad in pink entered wielding a kunao and screaming. "Let Enchan go. I am Super S-chan. It's Super S-chan. We're saved." Kei-kan screamed in joy. She skipped through the battle and the end with the slightly steamy description of Super S-chan and Enchan doing something behind a door unclogging a pipe, considering the words like, "go in deeper" and "faster" coupled with "not so hard" and "be gentle" when putting it in. What else could those words be used for? She watched as Naruto yawned, probably ready to go to bed. She blushed scarlet. They had slept in the same bed before, but what would change now? Damn, she wasn't ready. Well, maybe a bit not, she didn't know. The tanned bitch whore was not a menace, on the ground of her being apparently with the mentality of a 7 years old. Unless it was all a ploy, the way she was going to Naruto's bed. Wait a moment. She snapped, looking towards Fu. "Where do you think you're going?" "Bed," Fu replied with another yawn. "I'm sleepy." That's Naruto's bed." "He said I could use it." She looked towards Naruto, who nodded at her. The next moment, Fu simply entered and jumped on the bed in question. Sakura could hear the springs creak as the girl probably jumped on the mattress up and down for a while. Her eyes then settled with a frown on Naruto. "I'll pull out the bed from beneath the sofa," Naruto shrugged. "You want to stay the night?" She nodded meekly, slightly blushing as she stood up and closed the book she had been reading until then. She helped set the guest bed up, and then carefully sat on one side as he took the other. The moment he dropped down and placed both of his hands behind his head, his eyes on the ceiling, she did the same. The mattress wasn't that horrible. It just was harder, and smelled slightly funny. She should have thought about airing it. The pillow was the true problem. She was about to ask Naruto for another one, when she realized he was already sleeping. She blinked. He was actually sleeping, without any care that there was a potential assassin in the next room. Carefully, with a blush on her face, she dropped her head on his chest and went to snuggle against it. Acting on instinct, she brought her left hand to rest on the chest of Naruto, humming in pleasure as she tried her best to keep an eye open for trouble. Since Naruto was sleeping, she'd be the one making sure nothing bad happened. In the end, the moment Naruto was completely knocked out, his body brought down one of his arms from the back of his head to hug the warm form he was feeling. Sakura's blush and the heat that reached her cheeks were enough to knock out the pink-haired Chiryunin. And for once, they all slept peacefully. The next morning, Naruto woke to the feeling of a slight breath sending warm air to the underside of his chin. It was a soft snoring sound, merely a heavy breather, and it seemed to come from somewhere extremely close. He slowly opened his eyes to the sun's rays glaring dangerously through the open window. He could hear the slight moaning of Sakura because of the light that was dangerously close to her shut eyelids. He carefully brought his right hand to cup her cheek softly, letting the shadow of his hand extend and cover her eyelids. Sakura smiled in her sleep, as she snuggled closer. He sighed. He had a report to write and deliver, and then he'd have to get a new mask assigned. A soft knock at the door woke him, and he mentally cursed. Softly knocking normally alerted only the residents already awake in a household, but in a shinobi village even walking on the stairs outside alerted at least half the building. He grumbled beneath his breath as he stood to sit on the side of the bed, and then stretch for a moment before heading for the door. Behind him, he could already hear Sakura's erratic movements of fake sleep. She was probably palming a kunao as he was giving her his back. Fu was already standing up, he had no doubt about that. As he opened the door, he expected to find. Well, he didn't expect to find Shikamaru Nara on the other side of it. He really didn't expect it at all. "We have a problem," the Nara spoke. "You are required," he added then. "Hokage's orders 5 minutes tops, at the tower." He nodded and then watched the Nara leave. He wondered what it was all about even as he closed the door and went to dress. Sakura was already standing with her arms crossed over her chest, pouting slightly and looking at him with an affronted look. "So, going out on a mission?" she asked then with a teasing grin. He actually looked at her, in the sunlight that slowly came in from the window at her back, and imagined her a few years older, with more curves and a far more adult smile. The image was soon gone, replaced with the slightly worried-looking teammate he had trained and shed blood with. She even looked downcast. "Yeah," he nodded. "Can you take care of Fu while I'm out?" Sakura bit her lip, and then nodded with a slight blush on her face. "Yes." She slowly walked forward just as he finished clasping the Chiryunin flak jacket. "But..." She pouted and locked eyes with him. "Can I have a morning kiss?" He smiled and gave her a light peck on the lips, before bringing his forehead to rest against hers. "All right." "Yep," she giggled, before carefully pushing him out of the door. "Now off you go, Naruto. You've got a mission to do." Naruto nodded and left, disappearing in a flicker of leaves. Sakura just smiled warmly, before turning to look at the tanned girl who had come out of Naruto's bedroom. She brightly said then, without a worry in the world, "Well, let's have breakfast, and then I'll show you around the village, eh?" Fu nodded. "Will Naruto eat with us later?" "Of course he will." She rolled her eyes. "Maybe not lunch," she amended, "but definitively dinner." Naruto entered the Hokage's office to find a disparaged group of genin and Chiryunin ready as well as the head of the Hyuga clan to boot. "Listen here, brats," the Go-Dame spoke calmly as he watched him enter. "The situation is as follows. There has been a push of sound ninja or abominations of sound ninja from the Valley of the End, and at the same time we have your friend Hinata who has been kidnapped from the hospital and brought in the direction of Kiri by at the very least a group of 4 or 5 shinobi." Tsunade rolled her eyes. "But it's pretty clear-cut by the mean used the devouring and the donning of a human body that it is a Kumigaku or shinobi who did this. There are 2 possibilities, either the individual belongs to the Bakeniko clan, or it's outright the Jinhuriki of the Nibi." There were hushed whispers, which soon silenced themselves after the Go-Dame's glare. "As it is, the able-bodied shinobi will be fighting off the sound troops in the Valley of the End. However, we cannot let Hinata reach the border of Kumo. The Byakugan cannot fall in the hands of the Land of Lightning, and we cannot afford to start a war with them to get it back." Naruto recalled the name of the fat boy eating chips a moment after the Go-Dame finished speaking. His name was Chuji Akimichi. He hadn't changed much, if at all. "Thankfully among you there is someone with the bird summons," Tsunade continued. "You should be able to catch up with them within the end of the day if you head off now." Her amber eyes locked with Naruto. "Naruto Namikaze, as Takubutsu Jounin, will lead the team." "Troublesome," Shikamaru muttered. Chuji nearly choked on his chips. There was a screech from a girl. "Wait, her name was Ami, right?" Then there was a sharp exclamation of, "What? No. No way in hell that I'm letting that monster guide us." "Hokage-sama." It was Hibachi. The civilian boy was now slightly taller, wearing his forehead protector on his head and holding a glare that was nothing compared to an angry Sakura. "If I'm to lead," Naruto remarked carefully, "then I don't need dead weight. I can cover more distance alone." "Maybe, but you would not cover enough area," Tsunade replied. "And if you were to use your Kage Bunshin, you'd be without chakra by the time you'd end up fighting the Nibi in the worst case scenario. You are all I can spare at the moment, and you will have to do." "Namikaze-san," the Hyuga clan leader spoke then firmly, taking a step forward. "Bring my daughter back alive, whatever the cost, and I swear I will repay you tenfold." Naruto nodded at that. "No need to waste more time then," he said quickly. "Every shinobi or kunoichi that follows my lead, change your radio frequency to 449, he reached for the window and opened it. "Are we dismissed, Hokage-sama?" "If it's the Jinhuriki," Tsunade said then firmly, "you are to try to possibly capture her alive." He gave a single nod. Tsunade nodded back. Then they were gone, all of them. Naruto looked behind him, at the shinobi following his lead. He had Shikamaru Nara, Akimichi Chuji, there was Kiba Inyazuka who was strangely quiet, Ami and Hibachi, he wondered why they hadn't called for Sakura. There also was a cloaked genin with a pair of sunglasses on his face, who seemed to be Shito? Shino? Shino. The guy who had helped him in the middle of the forest of death, now he remembered. He was an Abarame, wasn't he? Inyazuka. You have any track? He barked in the radio. No, the boy remarked. Why was he being so quiet? Had he possibly grown? Abarame. The female Kikaichu I left on Hinata was killed. Naruto exhaled. This wasn't going to be easy at all, was it? If only he had a way to track. He bit down on his thumb, before summoning enough chakra to call forth a big bird. He wondered what would appear, if he didn't call out for Hajiwashi. He jumped in the air and pushed his palm downwards as seals erupted in mid-air from his palm. A humongous plume of smoke soon gave way to a giant golden feathered hawk with a sharp crimson beak. Its eyes were red and bloodshot, a morsel of flesh stood within his beak that he hastily gulped down. Summoner. I am Sashiba of the Falcons. On whom shall we feast on this glorious day? Sashiba, we're pursuing 2, maybe 3 enemy shinobi. They kidnapped a Hyuga of Konoha, he said quickly. Our only lead is that there either is a Bakeniko clan member or the Nibijin hierarchy among the kidnappers. They're headed towards Kumo territory, even though they're trying to make it seem as if Kiri had a hand in it. The hawk flapped its powerful wings, looking back at the admittedly tiny in his opinion humans he was supposed to carry on his back. He narrowed his eyes on them, and then gave a curt nod of his head. They may climb on my back, but I demand a payment. 5 deer carcasses. Shikamaru spoke without even flinching, as if he was actually used to dealing with such a creature. 10, the hawk replied. Fine, he shrugged. No skin off my teeth. Naruto blinked, but did not speak. It was as the hawk departed once more, with the shinobi on his back, that Shikamaru took pity on him. Konoha held the crow contract through the Uchiha. The Uchiha paid the Nara for deer carcasses now and then, and when the Uchiha were slaughtered, they simply came directly to us. Ah, he nodded and returned to gaze ahead. The wind was ruffling his hair, as the cold breeze of the higher altitude made his briskly clench and rub his hands together. Do you see them, Sashiba? There is nothing my eyes cannot see from above, the hawk remarked. The question is what I see what you need? Naruto ground his teeth. He wondered why the Hokage had insisted on sending him with such a team. He didn't need them to cover the ground quickly. Shikamaru nudged his shoulder with an open bingo book. Here, the Nara drawled. Have your hawk look through this page. There's the Nibijin hierarchy's face. He gave a quick glance at the picture of a woman with blonde hair tied in a long ponytail, with stern features and wearing dark purple chest armor coupled with a black underneath shirt. The symbol of Kyumigakuer was visible on her forehead protector, and she seemed to be looking at the photographer with a look of utter disgust. He carefully touched the pictured frame. Misery. When this is over, I'll have to suffer through another one. I hate this. Why can't I just find someone? Hatred. Pathetic, sniveling, bastard creatures unworthy of existence. Your weakness disgusts me. I'll smile for now, but I will show you the true. His eyes snapped open to the direction he could hear those thoughts come from. To the north, he said crisply. They're moving through the forest over there, a blonde woman, a dark-haired girl. Misery. Why couldn't father just accept us, mother? Ah, he chuckled. Full circle, he smiled. Listen up. He turned to look at his team. I don't know why the Hokage decided you all needed to come, frankly. I'm sure I'll be enough for this, he remarked dryly. In any event, you're here so you better understand this. I'm your team leader, so what I say goes. He narrowed his gaze at Hibachi's snort. If you don't like it, then I don't give a damn, he hissed. I can't sense how many enemies there are precisely, but one is the Nibijin hierarchy without doubt. The rest of the team paled. She's mine, so do not intervene in things that don't concern you, he added carefully. You will divide yourself in 2 teams. Team 1 will be composed of Kiba, Shino, and Ami. You 3 are to take Hinata and leave as fast as possible. Team 2 will have Shikamaru, Hibachi and Shuji. You will guard Team 1's back while they retreat. He closed his eyes and then swallowed nervously once. Finally, our mission is to prevent Kyumigakuer from taking Hinata Hyaga's eyes. If it seems as if I'll be overpowered, or if they still are holding on to Hinata, then your priorities switch to killing her. That's sick. Ami exclaimed. She's a fellow citizen of Konoha. She's a mission objective, Naruto frostily remarked. If her eyes are gone, Kyumigakuer won't try such a stunt again so soon. If you let her live, Konoha won't move soon to recapture her, and must I tell you what they'll do to her to get more Byakugan users? He took a step towards the girl. They'll probably keep her in a comfortable cell and once a day, until she ends pregnant, she'll be raped. They'll repeat it until she'll be broken, and always they'll take her child away. If the child is a female, they'll wait until she's of age for reproduction, which might just be until she's 13, and they'll start again. He pointed his finger towards Ami. Killing her is a mercy. We're not heroes. We're not infallible. If the mission is about to fail, then morals are meaningless. He stepped back towards the head of Sashiba and kept his gaze focused on his objective. What a drag, Shikamaru muttered from his spot on the back of the hawk. Chuji remained quiet. Then we just have to win this. Hibachi exclaimed suddenly, taking a step forward. With your strength on our side, we can win and complete this mission, right? How quick, Naruto remarked dryly. Am I not a monster? He turned his eyes back to the boy. I should just kill the Hyaga and crush her eyes. That would be simpler, and I could always claim the mission was a failure, he shrugged. Nobody would blame me, nobody that counts, that is. Thankfully the Hokage asked her back alive, and unharmed, Shikamaru muttered. What the Hokage wants, what the village wants, what the people want, what the shinobi want, they are seldom the same thing, he remarked. But we go forth all the same with doing our missions. Man, and here I thought I was bonkers, Kiba muttered then, with Akamaru yapping next to him. The dog was now as big as the Inyazuka's knees. You smell rotten, Naruto. I thought it was your usual stupidity, but this goes beyond stupid. Naruto shrugged. Think what you want, just don't slow me down. He couldn't understand those children next to him. How had they gotten their vests? Had they fought through blood and tears for the responsibility to carry them? Had they maybe been patted on the head, and been told good job by their parents? Was that how they earned their vests? Ami slowly made her way forward, stopping slightly behind Naruto. She coughed lightly to get his attention, and then smiled sweetly. Hey, she said soothingly. I know we're getting on your nerves. Hibachi made a strangled noise with his throat, while his hands were mimicking throttling the girl. But could we all get along, please? He didn't answer the girl. He just closed his eyes and waited. He could feel the excitement build in his body, and thrum powerfully through his veins. The Nibi was there, barely a few hours away from him. He wasn't going to let such an opportunity go to waste. In the world of the shinobi, everyone was out for themselves, so why would anyone care if he took his own slice? Elsewhere, among dilapidated buildings and waves that crashed against the old cracked port, the snake sun traveled through the devastation that was everywhere. Uzashiagakuer showed itself in all of its decadent glory to him, and he couldn't help but start to talk. War tore the land. Blood rained from the skies, Orochimaru said apparently to no one as he walked through the ruins. Death came through plague, pestilence, and famine. People cried out for salvation, but it did not come. The wars of the past ravaged the land of its bounty. The secrets were hidden, the science destroyed. All that we have in our hands are the relic of the past, bound by locks too far beyond our comprehension. The snake sun hummed as he looked above, to the sky. I wonder, he chuckled. Have you come this far to hear me rant? Orochimaru, Toby said dryly, appearing from behind a corner of a dilapidated building. What are you doing here? Sightseeing. Maybe, the snake sun commented. His golden eyes looked amusingly towards the man. Have you come to chat, Obito? The masked man tensed, and then relaxed. No, I have not. He unclasped the spiraling mask, to reveal his face half was old, the other half smoothly white. Very well then, Orochimaru smiled. He could hear his blood thrum, his heartbeat pulse beneath all the layers of rotten flesh and chakra that he used as a body. Show me then, little Uchiha. Show me if your eyes are worthy. A Sharingan with 3 tomo shone in the other socket of Obito's eyes. He said nothing, and in the silence broken only by the wind fluttering across the landscape, the waves crashed unnaturally strong against the coast. Among the dilapidated building, the broken blocks of concrete, the charred and upturned cars, 2 shinobi looked at one another with but a single thought in mind. To win. To survive. To rule. Chakra flew across their hands as wind answered the call to one just as fire came for the other. Orochimaru's movement seemed slow to Obito's Sharingan, but as he expelled fire shurikens where he was supposed to be, the snake Sunin slithered in a way a normal body could not and avoided them. His sword came from his mouth, the kusanagi that flew in the sky. Orochimaru gripped the handle of his sword as the blade extended, its point slicing through the concrete and the ground, detonating the area where the metal passed and leaving behind but a trail of destruction all the way up to where Obito stood. The Uchiha let the blade pass through him, before charging ahead while calling forth giant shurikens from thin air, sending them to connect with the lower body of the snake Sunin who did not parry or block them. The body of the enemy tore in half, but soon snakes erupted from the wound, reconnecting the 2 parts. The kusanagi resumed its normal size just in time to come between Obito and his advance on the snake Sunin, forcing them into a match of kenjutsu. Sparks flew in the air as the blades connected and battled in a series of thrust, parries and swipes. The noises, the clanks and clinks mixed with the soaring noise of the wind that emerged from Orochimaru's mouth and the rumbling of fire that spewed forth from Obito's lips. They ducked, dodged, and parried, they sidestepped volleys of steel and chakra. A lethal dance of steel wires, shuriken, of ground broken and filled with the water of the sea soon followed, before they separated with a simple jump. They stood at the edges of the lagoon that once was Uzushiagakure's port. Neither of the 2 was breathing hard, neither was sweating. There will be no retreating, Obito murmured. Not from this, not after this, Orochimaru, what is it that you are truly planning? A thunder struck the sky, which began to darken. There was a flash of light, and Orochimaru dashed forward through the water at a speed Obito's Sharingan could barely keep up with. The snake Sunin twisted in midair, releasing from his hands a myriad of snakes that soared through the air, their mouths opening and unleashing thousands of blades all poisoned, all sharp. Obito became ethereal, letting the weapons pass through him without trouble. It was then that he felt something he shouldn't have, and hastily dodged to the side. Ah, yes, I suspected as much, Orochimaru laughed. Your eyes. They are the center of your technique, but, their purpose, it is simply to bring what is to somewhere it is not. You are intangible as long as your eyes stay on this plane. Thus, if I attack your body and your eyes, you have to dodge, especially if the attacks come from beneath, behind, or above the eye itself. Obito bit his tongue. He shouldn't have been so hasty to dismiss Orochimaru's cunningness. He hadn't known about that limitation either before. It made sense in retrospect. He could make his body intangible in one place because he transported it into another, but his eyes were always either the first thing to pass through or the last. Fair enough, he murmured. Should you really be fighting me? Together, we could. Today I decided I would kill you, Orochimaru shrugged. No deals with you today. A pity, his eye morphed into the Manjikyu variant, then, die. Black flames erupted in the spot he had been observing, namely, Orochimaru. The fire burned brightly against the Sunin, but as the heat dwindled down, he realized it had been nothing more than a mud clone. The real Orochimaru scattered a plethora of explosive tags towards him, before slicing with his kusanagi the air. Obito growled as he absorbed the tags at the same time ducking to avoid the tip of the blade. He heard the explosions on the other side and smirked. Orochimaru then smiled sweetly. The next instant, he flung a kunai towards Obito's chest. Resorting to petty tricks, now. The moment Obito said that and made the part disappear before the kunai struck, a sharp pain tore through his insides. He doubled over, coughing blood as he saw the blade of the kusanagi coming back down to slice at his back. As blood sprayed in the sky, tinging everything in a light red mist, Obito fell on the ground harshly breathing. He tried to leave, but was stabbed once more from the inside. The explosive tags were Kage Bunshin, Orochimaru smoothly remarked. Do not think your eyes grant you a power beyond which my intelligence cannot reach. Do not think that blood is worthier than skill, Uchiha, for it isn't. The snake Sunin walked forward. You will die. The Kusanaga's poison, it cannot be fought or defeated. He kicked the Uchiha in the sides, making sure Obito's head remained down on the ground by pushing his other feet on his neck. This was a battle of ideals. Obito Uchiha, Orochimaru spoke calmly. Yes, I know your name, I know your identity. I know your truth. There was a light chuckle. You think a perpetual genjutsu will work, pathetic creature? To use the moon? Do you know not the rules of energy, of mass? You cannot create or destroy matter, but only transform it. You cannot remove energy from the universe, only add to it. The soul, the chakra, once it departs, it is forever gone. That is the truth of chakra, after all. There was a light hiss, as the snake Sunin unsheathed his kusanagi. The chakra is the energy that endlessly pours into the universe, birthed from other living beings into their spawns, delivered instant after instant with each dying breath to a force stronger than you could ever imagine. The voice of the Sunin grew slowly heated as he spoke. In the beginning, chakra belonged to the universe, it belonged to the world. Yet the sage of the six paths took it, he stole it, like Prometheus took the fire from the gods, the sage took the energy from the universe, from nature. There was an instant of silence. Of course, you don't know who Prometheus is, do you? You don't even know half of what I'm talking about. But I know. I know because I dared to ask, and I dared to listen. Orochimaru chuckled. I dared to learn. I dared to acknowledge. I dared to find the truth hidden by the mist of ignorance. The Sunin gave a hesitant kick to the Uchiha's body, looking as it turned and flopped with his gaze upwards. A vitreous gaze, glazed over, belonging to a dead shinobi. Your purpose? Your quest? It was egoistic. It was personal, and how could it benefit the world? Orochimaru chuckled then, slowly kneeling down in front of the man's face. You think I took Sasuke's eyes for some sort of crappy reason like learning techniques? He whispered to the body's ears. Guess what? I already have a pair of Sharingan eyes in a vase, in one of my labs, on one of the desks, covered in dust, they float. I had them since the Third Shinobi War, when your clan would not miss a tiny Chiryunin disappearing beneath the rubble. He passed his hand over the body's eyes, closing them and slowly standing back up. What I'm doing, it's not because I'm a mad shinobi. Sure, maybe I am a bit mad, but then again. He shrugged. Life's filled with madness. And in that moment, the corpse of Obito melted to show a nameless shinobi within it. Touché, Orochimaru chuckled. Obito's kunai pierced through the Sunin's heart in that moment, as the Uchiha stood with gritted teeth behind him. You wound me so, Obito-kun. Obito's eyes were burning with hatred, as the black flames of Amaterasu sprouted once more. Orochimaru's body burned, as the mouth distended to exhale a giant white snake that slithered across the port's water and disappeared within the lagoon. Obito breathed deeply. He had been right to send a body clone with only half his chakra. Orochimaru, was there something the snake Sunin couldn't do? He had grown up in Konoha with the myths on his frighteningly strong powers. Jiraiya and Tsunade, they both at least felt human. One could see them smile, play with kids, help others. Orochimaru had been the one feared, the one that scared children into submission with his mere presence. The other Sunin were cool. He was terrifying. He had been the bogeyman of Konoha. People gave him a wide berth wherever he went, and those who didn't, they generally shuddered when he walked closer to them. Now, around Obito, there was silence. His Sharingan caught the sight of a gale of wind before his body could react. He did however spin out from thin air a battle fan, which he filled with fire chakra and sent back, a wave of fire so hot it burned through the gale and beyond. In the wisp of the crackling flames, the Kusanagi soared to pierce his heart. He blocked it with the fan, swatting it away rather than taking the full brunt of the attack head-on. The sword spun and then resumed its flight, forcing him to dash forward atop the water. Very well, he muttered. If you wish to play the underwater serpent, then I will have roasted eel for lunch. Amaterasu burned, surrounding the lagoon and letting the unquenchable fire boil the water with their heat. Soon, vapors rose as Obito deflected the Kusanagi once more. The sparks ignited the air inflammable gas, then Nkomu stepped into a fiery fireball. Obito discarded his cloak as he pushed himself below the water, just in time to see the glistening fangs of the giant white snake come close to tear him in half. He swiftly substituted with his tattered cloak, coming back up before Orochimaru could bite him. He spun his body in midair, emptying his sleeves of explosive tags as he shot them in the boiling water. Orochimaru's form jumped out from the water, and with a glistening hiss of fury and anger, his body literally collided against Obito's form. The Uchiha careened back in the air, past the Amaterasu flames, and to crash against the nearby concrete wall of a dilapidated building. The giant white snake form of Orochimaru soon followed, and coiled itself like a spring ready to pounce. Why can't I? Obito coughed, as Orochimaru merely smiled sweetly. My blood, my breathing, my sweat, they are all a part of me. When I mastered the technique to swap bodies, I discarded my mortal shell, I refused the mortality of flesh, and in exchange I took as my body the eternity of chakra. Of course, there are some little bits that are wrong here and there. Senjutsu chakra tends to disrupt my body if I stay in it too long. You see, things always want their balance back, it's the law. An action will always generate a reaction equal and contrary to the applied force. Obito gritted his teeth. You know, the fun thing is, you might have won, had Itaka come around to help you. You didn't need to separate from him, you could have held him in your pocket dimension and gone to both villages in less than a second, but you didn't. You didn't because there are bits and pieces of truth I know that Itaka doesn't. To know the truth, such powerful thing, isn't it, in our world? What one claims truth, can be a lie. Obito snarled. But, you were the one who conjured the Kyuubi, were you not? Orochimaru smiled. You were Uchiha Madara, who whispered words of power to the Uchiha's clan's head, while convincing the council to exterminate them. You were the one who brokered a deal with Danzo, in exchange for the Sharingan to mature. Orochimaru shook his head. How else could an entire clan be destroyed with none the wiser? Root, Umbu, the council, and yourself, you were all in this together. Orochimaru chuckled. Just like they were with the Jinhiriki of the Kyuubi, isn't it? Obito's eyes narrowed. Who told you? Someone no longer of this world, Orochimaru smiled. Someone. He smirked, whose opinion I honestly valued. Meddling old fool, Obito spat out. So what? The Uchiha clan, it was rotten to the core. A cursed clan. Surely, you jest, the snake Sunin smiled. There is no such thing as a god, an almighty kami. The Shinigami is but a demon who feasts on souls, the creation of chakra. Curses, they do not exist. Everything in the world can be explained with science, chakra, or a combination of both, Orochimaru hissed. I'm not here to learn philosophy from a madman. Obito screamed as the purple ribs of a spectral creature emerged to surround him. The Manjaku in his left eye bled, as the creature sprung down on Orochimaru its sword. The snake hissed and laughed, as it suddenly ripped itself apart. 7 heads darted to grab and hold onto the limbs of the creature made of dark and foul chakra. Like an octopus cracking open an oyster, Orochimaru pushed through the defense of the technique and slammed itself against Obito's mouth open in a scream. The entire frame of the snake seemed to disappear then, engulfed and devoured by the Uchiha. Obito stumbled, his Susanoo dispersing as he felt all of his muscles ripple and crack. He screamed as blood gushed out from his mouth, his hands flailing to rip his throat and try to expel the disgusting thing within, his eyes rolled backwards, his mouth frothed reddish ooze. He choked and coughed, falling on the ground with his hands slamming repeatedly against the rock and concrete surface of the rubble. His body convulsed, his screams echoed in the empty ruins. Then, as if someone pushed a switch, he fell limp on the ground. When next he stood up, golden eyes looked through his own. And now, he clenched his fist. The skin slowly melted and reformed, covering him and granting him back the form that was his from birth. Orochimaru turned and began to whistle. We head towards the cage meeting. He disappeared within a whirlpool of sheer nothingness. How else would he arrive in time, after all? Yujito Nii looked with a mixture of anger and disbelief at the escorts following her. That hadn't been part of the deal. Kyumigakuer was supposed to get the Hyaga in a safe passage through the Land of Sound to stave off the Konoha shinobi in pursuit. In exchange, Kyumigakuer would provide Sound with military equipment, and an alliance in a possible war with Konoha. What she had faced then, those beasts couldn't be defined as helpful at all. They had been forced to deviate from their intended road because the Valley of the End wasn't an option with the massive battle against, well, abominations and monsters. The Nibi had felt the death, the spirits of the departed and their souls leave the bodies. There simply had been no other reason for her to act up like that. Of course, the Nibi was genderless, but it was better for her sanity to consider it a her and leave it at that. The people helping her were from Kiri, paid to act as an escort. The girl with raven hair had a unique bloodline, which she had used in getting the girl away from Konoha. She could create ice mirrors, and freely pass through them. The experiments must have run rampart, another of her escorts spoke, trying to calm her down. She didn't need them per se, but someone had to carry the whiny Hyaga. Well, the girl had been mostly quiet throughout the journey, but still, she kept on talking as if she hadn't realized they were kidnapping her. Such stupidity warranted becoming breeding stock for Kyumigakuer. For the sake of our alliance, I hope so, she replied frostily, her eyes on the man known as Feudo. He had been Plan B to enter Konoha, with the usage of his earth techniques. He had wild dark hair and a scraggly and unkempt short beard. Now they were heading directly towards Kyumigakuer, going against everything they had planned. If a Konoha patrol stopped them, she had no doubts it would result in some unpleasant time with the Raikage yelling at her. Of course, the suave voice of the woman known as Fuka came next. Yujito didn't like the woman. If anything, it was because she could feel the woman's wrongness. She acted like a sort of vixen with flowing red hair, which stretched down to her waist, and fair skin with a beauty mark under the left side of her lip. Her blue eyes sparkled with that type of feminine mirth that made men weak on their knees. Hinata, Yujito said then, with a calm and seraphic smile. She had discarded her nurse persona with a small lie, and now she had to be gentle when talking to the girl, as she was the friend of the nurse, or she'd just tense and become useless for an hour or more. Can you see if someone's following us? The meek Hyaga nodded, and hastily activated her Byakugan. She paled a moment later. There's a. The next moment, it rained shinobi. Wearing a dark Chiryunin flak jacket, with the symbol of Konohagakuer visible on the forehead protector, Naruto Uzumaki's Cage Bunshin flew down with their shadow blades in hand. Even though the strength of the impact would shatter them into plumes of smokes, the gravity would still grant strength to his Yoroi Toshi. If he could hit one of them, then. The raven-haired girl that he remembered from the exam disappeared within a set of polished ice mirrors, from which thousands of ice senbons appeared to counter and destroy the Bunshin while in the air. Sashiba flapped its wings with strength as he descended as fast as he could. Naruto ignored the screams of surprise from the rest of his team. He had given them orders, it was up to them to use them. He jumped down, landing with his feet against the branch of a tree and spinning downwards on it as a fireball the size of a tennis ball heated the air in the spot he had been a second before. He narrowed his eyes on the Nibi Jinhiriki, who kept her eyes trailed on him with an amused smirk. He dashed forward, Yoroi Toshi in hand, as his Cage Bunshin kept on turning to vapor. Sashiba disappeared after carrying them, and using the air and smoke of his departure, the two teams hid in the forest ready to strike at the right moment. Of course, they were probably counting on using him as a distraction. It didn't actually matter to Naruto, his own objective was clear-cut. He sped up, his Yoroi Toshi stabbing forward as a gust of wind erupted from the blade. Yujito sidestepped it, before throwing a punch straight into Naruto's guts. He could feel his breath leave him, as he gritted his teeth and substituted with a Cage Bunshin the next instant just in time to avoid a vertical swipe of the woman's leg that would have painfully broken something. She had to be at least on a Jounin level. Hey. He's a wind user. The red-haired woman spoke then, can I have him? He's not alone, Yujito replied. He has allies hiding in the woods like little mice, waiting for a cat to eat them up. She licked her lips then, smirking. You still have to defeat the big bad fox first, Naruto countered. And foxes eat cats. The Kyumigakuer Jounin charged ahead, pouncing on the blonde-haired Konoha shinobi with her nails elongating. Naruto mentally cursed. The Jounin was a taijutsu user. He could use the tanto to attack and stab, but in close combat? He had to change the range of the confrontation. He barely avoided a swiping claw, which however cut him nicely on the left arm, leaving behind bloody gashes that began to burn. He could feel the chakra of the Nibi within the wounds, festering and rotting until a sharp jet of red chakra erupted from his body, grabbing a hold and choking to the death. If chakra could choke, that is the intruder. The wounds stopped burning, but Naruto growled all the same. There had been no bleeding from the wound. Baijuyo chakra is toxic, Yujito said. But I suppose it's useless against another Jinhiriki, she smiled coyly. Was she enjoying this? He substituted quickly with a Kage Bunshin, ending up hiding behind the trunk of a tree as a tornado of wind and petals slashed through his clone's body. The red-haired woman grumbled then, having been the author of the technique. Shouldn't you be taking care of the mice? Yujito asked Fuka, who merely scoffed. Fudo is enough for the small fries. I want a wind user. Fudo was simply having a good fight. The fat guy was an Akimichi. His eyes never went wrong and he was enjoying smashing his face on the ground. Well, fatty? Is this all you can do? Chuji's face was turning purple and bluish, but Fudo simply wasn't done. He was about to unleash another one of his rock-armored punches, when he found his entire body immobilized. He growled in irritation. Kage main successful, Shikamaru murmured from his spot. He slowly moved his hand away, which Fudo mimicked, before standing up and walking away from Chuji's prone body. The man had simply been too fast for the Akimichi. The moment Chuji had enlarged his right hand to attack, the other had punched his friend in the guts, sending him sprawling on the ground. Ami had luckily dashed ahead with Shino and Kiba, but even they were busy with the Kunoichi defending Hinata. The fact Hinata was actually helping the enemy, it had ramifications he didn't like at all. Kill him, Hibachi. The moment he snapped that order, the other genin dashed forward with his kunao in hand, and then he froze a moment away from the man's neck. I can't. The boy exclaimed fearfully. I mean. Shikamaru cursed under his breath. He had wanted to preserve his chakra, but as it was, he slowly slithered his shadow up to man's neck, but the moment he tried to snap it, armor made of Doton chakra formed all around the enemy ninja. Ha, Fudo chuckled, I'll take great pleasure in killing you slowly. For this once I'm free, I'll bury you in the ground and let the gravel suffocate you. Maybe I'll fill your lungs with stones and let you choke on your own shredded innards. Shikamaru's concentration wavered for a second, but as he hastily gripped back on the Kage mane, he looked from Hibachi to Chuji's fallen form. Hibachi! Get Chuji away from here. Why yes. Hibachi exclaimed, moving to grab and help up the swollen-faced Akimichi. Shikamaru's eyes then traveled to where Ami was, and where the Kunoichi with the Kirigaku or forward protector was making short work of the team. Haku knew better than to toy around with enemies. She knew better because there was the monster among them. She had no doubt it would be a long fight, and she had no doubt it would end up being a highly destructive one, but in the end, she didn't have a shred of doubt that it would be the Konoha ninja to emerge victorious. She had felt his power and his malice on that night, and she no longer could sleep afterwards. His feral glare, his fang-like teeth, his crimson eyes, they scared her to death. Even though she should have kept some chakra to form another mirror of ice elsewhere and leave, she had to make Zabuza-sama proud with this mission. It would make Kiri weak from the civil war, an ally of both Oto and Kumo, who was their neighbor by sea. Cooperation was the key to survival. The Mizukage had told her so. Therefore, with grace and calm, she killed her heart and fired. The Senbon needles were made of ice, and as they sped up, they hit without fault the vital organs of the trio of genin within. It was quick and painless. The moment she watched the three corpses fall on the ground, she gave a single shuddering breath of relief. It had been quick, and she had been merciful. Then the bodies flickered and turned into trunks filled with explosives, and the detonation forced her to cover her eyes and move through the mirrors, as a roar of a typical Inyazuka technique ringed in her ears. Behind you, Haku-san! Hinata screamed as she deftly moved once more. A mirror of ice broke just the one she had been in before, and another soon followed. She reformed them, trying to trap the spinning tornado of claws and teeth that was the Inyazuka. The boy was too fast, however, and he slipped through before she could complete the trap. She melted the mirrors and disappeared into a puddle of water that formed on the ground after that. Her eyes settled on her surroundings. The Hyuga was still there, her Byakugan active. They're hiding behind those trees. She pointed out in their directions, and Haku smiled briefly to herself. With the help of the Hyuga, she would not fail Zabuza-sama. Naruto snarled as he felt his heart pump from the effort to spin a Bijudama in his mouth. The moment Yujito closed in ready to rend through him, his throat engorged and he unleashed the technique. A ray of energy passed through his mouth and tore apart the trees beyond Yujito, who had ducked, destroying the ground and leaving behind the same scene of destruction as the falling of a meteorite would have. In that instant, he jumped back and formed the hand seals for his wind technique as another cage bunshin popped into existence to make fire. A third joined the line, forming a tornado of chakra with his right hand. In an instant, a flaming tornado the size of a house twirled and spun on Naruto's hand, before the boy flung it forward with a scream. The forest's branches lit on fire immediately as the heat reached that of a scorching desert in the middle of the day. Yujito just smiled at the incoming tornado of fire, while Fuka went through hand seals as fast as she could. Suten, Haran Bansho. Water poured down from the sky like a waterfall, surrounding Fuka just before the flames could reach her. Steam rose from the contact between fire and water, and Yujito just smiled more and more as the tornado sizzled and finally died down. "You call that fire?" Yujito smiled. She smiled and she giggled as she pushed her hands together to form a hand seal. "Let me show you true fire." Then Yujito was gone. She was gone, and replaced with the giant flaming form of cerulean fire that was the Nibi itself, who roared and crashed down its right paw on the ground. The ground cracked and splintered as cerulean flames rose through the cracks and the fissures, burning their way upwards towards Naruto. The boy barely jumped backwards, as the ground detonated in an explosion of lightning and fire so strong it melted the very ground into lava. This is fire. And the Nibi laughed as she charged ahead. Shikamaru cursed, as he had to let go of the cage mane or die in a scorching inferno. Hibachi had luckily taken Chuji away, but as he quickly ran from the flaming Baijuya, he saw the flicker of Fyodo's rock-encrusted fist coming for the back of his head the next instant. The last thought Shikamaru had, before the fist reached his head, was that a Doton technique to enhance arms usually broke heads as if they were nothing more than ripe watermelons. Haku had taken Hinata away on her back, passing through an ice mirror. The technique wasn't made to have passengers, but she could work with what she had and coat Hinata in ice chakra, before substituting with her through the glass mirrors. It was a perilous thing to do on the run, but as long as it worked. Behind her, she could hear the Inuzuka in pursuit. He was screaming to her to stop after all, but she wasn't going to. She would not fail Zabuza-sama ever again. Sakura smiled towards Fu, whom she had now classified as a non-menace. The girl was childish, and more of a passing threat. Furthermore, Naruto had said he loved her, and he had even kissed her. She was blushing every time she remembered the scene. Carefully, her hands grabbed the teacup of the nice outdoor cafe in Konoha she had chosen as a rest spot while on her tour with Fu. The teacup cracked. Chapter 49, Find Your True Ideal. Blood was everywhere. Shikamaru was on the ground, face first and mouth filled with dirt. He could feel the bits and pieces of rock grate at his gums, as the coppery taste of the crimson fluid touched his tongue. He shuddered and convulsed. He had avoided the lethal blow. He had lowered his head just in time, thankful of the lessons with his father. He had done that, and the man had proceeded to kick him through 2 trees and half a mile in the ground. Shikamaru coughed out as he slowly turned, his bones and muscles creaking in protest as he rolled with his chest upwards, to watch with bleary eyes the sky, which was slowly but surely turning a dark shade of purple and red. The clouds looked crimson, like blood. Would they cry, when he finally exhaled his last breath? He watched the man poise for his final strike, and exhaled, what a troublesome way to die. Kiba could not stop running, or he'd lose the trail. Akamaru was next to him, barking and panting. Yet the Kiri Kunoichi knew how to run. She avoided Shino's swarms with Hinata's help, which made it more difficult to stall her or stop her definitely. He snarled and gulped down a red pill, feeling his heart increase its rhythm. As he twisted in the Tsuga move to get ahead, an enormous drop of pressure flung him away from his feet together with Shino but also with the enemy. A roar quaked and cracked the land, as the Nibi charged ahead. With every step the Baijuyo took, the ground screamed its agony and tore itself apart in a shower of lightning and fire. The trees burned, reduced to charcoal splinters within mere instants of contact. Naruto hissed as he felt the heat come closer, and as his very skin burned, he screamed back. His eyes turned crimson as sand rushed up from the ground in columns of golden powder. They twisted and crashed against the open mouth of the Nibi, as golden chakra flowed through his hands. The Kyuubi Jinhyuriki opened his mouth, his throat engorging in rapid succession as blast after blast of concentrated chakra rays erupted to slam against the enemy's face. There was another roar, and a wall of cerulean fire turned to glass the columns of sand, before shattering at the passage of the electric current upon them. He clapped his hands together and shrieked, a typhoon of air contrasting the electricity. He landed with a fast cartwheeling move on the charred and cooling ground, his breathing slow and controlled. Misery. I want to remain beautiful forever. Why can't I live until the end of time? Hatred. Youngsters, their beauty is mine. Mine. Not theirs. Mine. He ducked, sidestepped, and then sliced ahead with his hands elongated into claws, before twisting his body and slamming a golden tanuki-like tail against the stomach of the red-haired woman that had appeared from the ground to strike at him. Atop the tail of gold was a crimson one, which seemed to overshadow the first. He heard the heat increase and the pressure drop drastically, before he avoided an ionized ray of, he couldn't call that thing fire, it was plasma, to say the least. The blue electric plasma ray shot forward, rearranging the very landscape to form a fissure of charred earth on the ground where it struck. The Nibi purred in her flickering blue fire before opening its mouth to cough out enormous amounts of small fist-sized pellets of fire. They looked easy to dodge and innocuous enough. The first one touching the ground detonated, taking away 5 burnt trees and leaving behind a crater the size of a house. When the rest of the veritable horde began to descend, Naruto took a deep steadying breath, and then erupted with chakra from his mouth as a second tail of crimson emerged from his back. Hatred. Die. 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 Malice. Die. 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 The roar became deafening, as a tornado of pure foul chakra of a dark purple color formed around Naruto's mouth, absorbing the falling fire pellets. The moment the tornado began to shine from the incoming explosion, the creature covered in a thick and dark chakra cloak, with 3 tails of crimson and 1 of gold, devoured it and smirked. His entire body enlarged, before in front of the smitten Nibi Jinhyuriki he smiled and shot it back tenfold. She barely dodged, feeling the heat and the unbelieving power of the attack tear apart the very mountain behind her. The next moment, the creature was in front of the Nibi's nose, fiercely gripping it with its claws. He was floating in midair, his face a mixture of horrifying features with dark and jagged teeth and bright yellow eyes that seemed to shine. He gripped her tightly by the muzzle, and then flung her on her back with a cackling laugh, smashing the ground as she gave out a scream that sounded more of pain than of anything else. Then, the crimson tails shot forth, and burst through the cerulean fires to pierce the sides of the Baijuyo. In that moment, the battlefield became eerily quiet. Naruto opened his eyes to a hall of white, and soon dodged a fist coming for his face. The Nibi Jinhyuriki stood there angrily hissing at him, making a swipe with her right hand extended to look like a claw. When he dodged that, she half spun around to kick him with her right foot, connecting with his stomach and making him clutch the tenderized area. He brought up his right hand to slam away her left palm coming down on him, before twisting his leg in a crude kick. She grabbed a hold of it and pulled him closer, before delivering a terrifying punch to his chest, sending him on the ground. He coughed out blood as he spun and made the woman fall down, before standing back up and twisting his body to eject 5 kunai from his sleeves, which the Kyumo Jounin parried with her own blade. The next moment, Naruto's Yoroi Toshi stabbed ahead and intersected with a chakra blade from Kyumo. Sparks rose in the air as Naruto screamed Akia, to riposte the blow. Losing her footing from the surprise, Naruto lowered his body like a coiled spring, and then jumped forward, tanto drawn. Yujito brought up her blade to parry, only for the tip of the Yoroi Toshi to pierce through the metal and break the sword apart. The Jinhuriki of Kumo twisted her body, using her long hair as a whip that slammed against his wrist, disarming him and forcing him to nurse his limb. With a snarl, Yujito drew closer once more. Naruto evaded the arched kick over his head, only for Yujito to use the other leg to flex and jump in midair, then spin and land a punch on the boy's back. Once more, Naruto fell on the ground coughing as the woman's weight settled on him. Pushing with brute strength alone, Naruto lifted the Jounin upwards and then flung a fist against her own stomach. Yujito barfed her own saliva from the strength of the blow against her guts, but then grabbed with both hands his wrist already wounded and pressed strongly against it. Naruto screamed and pushed her away, before wiping away the sweat from his brows. Yujito spat a drip of blood to her side, and then smirked. Well, this cat is giving the fox a run for his money. Naughty kitties should just be spanked, Naruto roared as he dashed forward, fist extended. Yujito met his fist with hers, and soon they weren't even bothering about defending each other. There was a maddening laughter in the air as Yujito's right fist connected with Naruto's cheek, the bone fracturing and the blood gushing to the Kyuubi's Jinhuriki mouth. Naruto's own fist slammed against the side of Yujito's head, making her see fuzzy and double, but not stopping her onslaught. His own didn't stop either, and soon they began to parry each other's blows until they both grabbed the opponent's arms and held. Yujito delivered him a headbutt first, before kneeing him in the stomach thrice in rapid succession. Naruto keeled over, and in that moment, Yujito delivered a devastating uppercut that sent him on the ground. The boy groaned and tried to lift his head and body, but she charged ahead, slamming her knee against his face and then pushing him on the ground as she palmed a kunai from her sleeve. She brought it to his throat and then hissed, breathing hard. Now give me a good reason not to kill you, Kyuubi Jinhuriki, Yujito threatened, pushing the side of the kunai closer to his throat, enough to trickle blood. He looked back at her, and found himself lacking a reply. He hadn't fought her to save Hinata, he hadn't talked to the girl more than once, during the exams. He hadn't actually been fighting for the village, or because it was his duty. He had been fighting for greed, for the need to prove he was stronger. He had been fighting for his own benefit. That wasn't something a hero said to the evil shinobi, was it? Then again, he had learned the hard way that there were no heroes and no devils, only shinobi. Please do, a rumbling voice echoed in the middle of the white nothingness. Nothing would amuse me more. The next moment, the whiteness cracked and splintered as dark purplish chakra oozed out as if the cracks were festering wounds. Rotten limbs and torn apart bones grew from the wounds inflicted upon the white walls, rotting and rusting everything upon their passage. Blood, thick and crimson, began to drip down from the very ceiling that turned a darker shade of red as it seemed to impregnate with blood its surface. Bars of iron and chains of flesh and bones twisted together with the purple chakra, as the horrifying mutation that rose from the ground itself was a mixture of both the Kyuubi and the Ichibai. The Kyuubi's body was slowly absorbing the one-tailed tanuki, but as it did, it looked as if he was nothing more than a two-headed deformed horror. There is nothing I would enjoy more, the two heads of the creature snarled, than to see him suffer. The chains bound and held him still, yet more and more rose in their twisted putrescence to stop the tailed demon from freeing himself as, for every chain that rose, another snapped, and oozed pus and blood on the ground. It was a sickening scene. What is this? Yujito hissed, pushing her kunai to Naruto's throat, to the point where blood began to trickle out alongside the sharp metal blade. I was the Kyuubi, the creature spoke, and I will be the Kyuubi once more, when this torture ends and the Ichibai is completely consumed by me. Until then, I bide my time watching and suffering. The last part came with sarcasm dripping from every word, as its crimson and golden eyes narrowed to slits. What is this place? Yujito snarled once more towards Naruto. Is this a genjutsu? Is this an illusion? The rotten limbs surged forward through the cracks, aimed at both Naruto and Yujito. The Kyumigakuer Jounin cartwheeled backwards, giving Naruto the time to roll out of harm's way as the column of rotten limbs smashed in the spot they had been before. You think this is but an illusion? Then why are you not fighting it? The Kyuubi Ichibai remarked, chuckling dryly. This isn't real, Yujito murmured, bringing her hands together in the normal release seal. Kai. I assure you, the monster whispered again, this is as real as you and me. Voices rose from the corner of the room, corpses opening their mouths to shriek in eerily terrifying tones that felt like ushered whispers. She's the Nibijin hierarchy. Stay away from her. She's going to kill you if she hears what you're saying, be careful. Why did she kill Takeo? Why? She's nothing but a monster. No, that was the Nibi, it was an accident during training. Yujito screamed back at the monster. They insult me, let them suffer, the Kyuubi whispered with his voice feminine and similar to that of the Jin hierarchy of the Nibi. Maybe I'll lose control of the Nibi during training and let them feel my pain for once. No, those were only thoughts, Yujito murmured, clenching her hands. I didn't plan to do it. Your malice was clear. The Kyuubi's head roared as the pressure of the wind increased, tearing apart the rotten columns of torn limbs and scattering the flesh around, blood spraying like a thin red mist in the now corrupted and rusty-looking hall they were in. Blood reached to their ankles, as Naruto's eyes narrowed. Where was Mito in all of this? Maybe they were. Yujito snarled back, her frame slightly trembling. But so what? They deserved it. I'm not going to cry for something like that. Kill or be killed, the Ichibi's head replied, is this all the world is about? Naruto ground his teeth as he looked around. His eyes caught a light sheen of blue from a corner of the room and moved before he could think properly. Slamming his shoulder against Yujito's sides, he pushed her away from the blue spheres of fire that would have otherwise hit her. Yujito rolled back on her feet and was about to snap at him, when she saw the Nibi's form roar from the corner appearing in all of its majestic flames. The blue spheres connected with another corner of the hall, detonating and blowing up plumes of black smoke as the rotten limbs turned themselves to ashes where the flames touched. Well, the Nibi laughed. I'm finally stretching my legs. She purred and shook her giant flaming head. And there are morsels to feast upon too, I bet. That's impossible. You were sealed. Yujito's scream died out, smothered by a sharp and shrill laughter from the twin-tailed cat of fire. Little girl, didn't I tell you that if you were to fight the Kyuubi Jin hierarchy, you would lose? Of course that is inconsequential, because he would lose too, the Nibi looked towards the Kyuubi. Brother couldn't hold himself up any longer, could he? That he couldn't, the Kyuubi whispered back softly. He is nothing more than a lump of chakra now, which I'm slowly absorbing. All must die eventually, the Nibi acquiesced. I felt his soul depart. Then again, it's not death when he lives on in us, is it? Indeed, the Kyuubi agreed. Shall I break the chains that bind you, brother? Naruto paled. He clenched his fist and carefully eyed his Yoroi Toshi, but if he was in his own mind, did he really need to? The Yoroi Toshi appeared in his hand. He firmly gripped onto it then. At least, he had an advantage now. No, the Kyuubi replied. There is a threat, I saw. What could possibly be such a threat for us together, brother? Yujito was silent, her entire body looked as if she was ready to make a run for it. The only problem was that there was nowhere to run. Trapped as they were, Naruto had the distinct impression that Mito would not be able to save him. Two of our brethren have already been claimed by the enemy, and they have used the body of our complete form to entrap them. I too felt drawn to it, but was able to hold on by remaining here. I see, the Nibi murmured. Do you think father meant that, when he told us of our new form? No, I doubt it, Kurama shook his head. Do not forget, Madatabi, our names are gifts. To lose them like that, I accepted the burden of Shukaku as a mercy, but I did not wish for it. I know that, the cerulean Baijuya whispered, her voice low. Still, to remain in the wretched body of that frail creature. You cannot ask me this. Her eyes shone furious as she looked towards Yujito, who took a step backwards instinctively. Unfortunately, Kurama murmured, it is a matter of instincts, the Kyuubi shook his head. To become whole, our own bodies betray us. Even now, my tongue thirsts for your chakra. It is like a corruptive influence that never ends. So I should be a prisoner of my own will. Madatabi said, to that. No, brother, I prefer oblivion in your embrace to slavery. I saw enough death in the world. Shinobi run rampant with death, using the gift of our father for warfare and devastation, rather than the peace he had asked them to create. Death is coming, brother. I feel it in my very bones, in my soul, is that why Shukaku died, because he could not resist the incoming misery. Be as it may, the nine-tailed fox replied, I will not grant it to you, Kurama whispered. I killed one too many of my brothers, I will not do so again. Then I will force your hand. The Nibi screamed. I have been enslaved long enough. A typhoon of cerulean flames erupted from the Baijuyu's mouth, only for a wall of sand and rotten limbs to rise and stop the onslaught, as more columns of putrid flesh blocked the cat's limbs and mouth. The Kyubai's eyes settled on Naruto firmly, before he spoke. The Nibi must be defeated, he said gravely. But not consumed. This is your mind, and thus you must push her back. Oh, yeah, let me bow and obey your will, Kyubai. Right. Naruto snapped back. Like last time, huh? Not a chance in hell. I do not care if you perish, Naruto Uzumaki, his eyes growled. I would like nothing more than to be free, to roam the earth and cleanse it once more, but I have to care, for if you perish while we are trapped here, in the limbo of your rotten and diseased mind, then what awaits me outside is but another form of slavery, one I will not tolerate any longer. On that, you have to believe me. Try again. Naruto swept his right hand forward, as if to rebuke his attempts at diplomacy. You can lie to me once, twice, but in the end. You were sorry you didn't listen to me once. Was that a lie of yours? Naruto stilled as he bit his tongue. No, it wasn't, he whispered softly. Then know this, the Nibi must be rebuked out of this place. Return her to her cage and then, only then, kill her. What? Yujito's scream made Naruto wince. What of me then? What happens when the Nibi dies? You are the Nibi's cage, the Kyuubi growled. It is not a matter of what, but of when. If Madatabi escapes, you die. If she dies, you die. If she gains control of yourself, you die. You will die no matter the outcome, Yujito nii. She fell down on her knees, shuddering. And no. There has to be something I can do. Come on. You're just a lying sack of shit. I trained harder than anyone else did to control the Nibi. I can control her, seal or no seal. I trained since I was 2 years old. They always said I could, and in the end I did. She screamed the last part, clenching her fists, slowly standing back up, determined to prove the fox wrong. Can you, really? Kurama laughed. You initiated this, mortals. You are the one to blame. In the beginning, we were all but one. We separated, but on a deeper level, we remained attached all the same. The connection we share, the one thing that you humans cannot take from us, that is the doom that befalls Jinhuriki who battle one another. The sand began to turn crimson from the heat, the mount of limbs slowly combusting as the Madatabi's screams became stronger and stronger from its momentary cage. When two Jinhuriki battle, only one walks away unscathed, Kurama murmured. How else could balance be achieved? It is in our very nature to strike for unity, yet our hearts demand our separation, for the will of our Father is what guides us. He turned his crimson orbs to Naruto. This much, I swear upon the Sage of the Six Paths is true, kill the Nibi, and you will set back the incoming onslaught of at least 2, maybe 3 years. That much time will be required for the deaths to pile up once more, and recreate my sister. He then looked towards Yujito. On the other hand, if you believe the woman's words, then find something you believe in, something that gives you strength beyond your limits, and use it as your strength to push out the Nibi from your mind. Kyuubi, Naruto whispered then, as his eyes widened. If you were to die, when would you reform? Columns of blue fire erupted from the sizzling mount in the background, already cracking apart. What a stupid question, the Kyuubi growled. 2 years. So the thing you need to prevent, is supposed to happen within the next year. Naruto's eyes widened as realization dawned on him. The words the Kyuubi had spoken. What is supposed to happen within the next year? Yujito asked then, her face ashen and pale. A war, what a stupid question that is, the Kyuubi sighed just as the Nibi freed itself from its prison. I will remain here, defeat her, Naruto Uzumaki, so that we may speak again afterwards. Naruto looked at Yujito and then exhaled. Hold the Nibi off, I'll try and push her out. There was a moment, where the eyes of the Kyumigakuer Jounin actually softened on him. It was an instant, which soon was gone as the woman nodded sternly. Naruto swallowed nervously. His throat was parched, his mind filled with different thoughts. He didn't know why he was fighting so hard, why he was trying to help the woman anyway. It had to be the words whispered. It was easy to consider an enemy such, if you didn't know his background. How easy was it to look at a fellow man, and call him monster, evil, demon, without knowing his past. Once his past manifested, however, it became difficult, not to draw comparisons. What was he fighting for, that gave him strength? Sakura? Weren't they just tasting the waters of their relationship? Was that even love? He didn't know. He couldn't know. What was love to begin with? Accepting the other side unconditionally? Turning a blind eye to their madness? She couldn't be the only reason he fought for. It wasn't enough. What else? Was he fighting for the village? No. The teammates fighting with him now, to rescue Hinata? No. A higher cause? No. But he needed something. He needed something that made his actions right and just, something that made them more. Being a shinobi, it didn't excuse needing to have an ideal. Kakuzu was a man of greed and money. That was his ideal. What was his? What made him fight more, what made him stronger? Had he forgotten that? How could he forget that? For who or what would he stand up again, to fight even when grievously wounded? He shuddered. He closed his eyes as the paw of the Matatabi came close to tearing his head off, and then the body of Yujito who ground her teeth and stood her ground, blocked it. The fire passed harmlessly through the woman's skin. Why are you stopping me, you daft woman? The Nibi screamed. Isn't he an enemy too? I would have made your death painless. If I have to die, Yujito muttered out. Then I'm taking you with me. She roared as expelled a wave of electricity, which made Matatabi scream and jump back, its twin tails swishing in the air frantically. You are the reason I was hated. I hate you. I hate you. Yujito screamed as she charged ahead. And if I have to suffer this because of you, she continued, her right hand morphing into an elongated claw filled with electricity, then I want you to feel my pain too. The Nibi roared as a Bijudama formed in her mouth, the dark chakra shining brightly as it exploded outwards in a ray, only for Yujito to flicker away from its path and right next to it. She crashed against the two-tailed cat with her claw hand extended, scratching and tearing apart both fire and skin as the demon screamed from the pain of the wound. What are you waiting for, Naruto? Kurama asked in a low murmur, his gaze settling on the frozen boy who had both hands to his hair, his eyes wide and trembling. His eyes glazed over, as if he had lost his purpose. What am I fighting for? He croaked. Money? Fame? Power? Strength? Love? What? What is it? What is this emptiness I feel? The Kyuubi closed his eyes and smiled, before resting his head down between his paws as the chains pushed tightly to hold him still. Every human will tell you that they fight for those who cannot fight. His eyes moved to Yujito, who was screaming in despair as she fought fiercely against her own demon. Every human will tell you that they fight to protect, to defend, to safeguard. They will tell you they fight, so that another does not need to. He took a single breath. They will all be wrong. People fight for ideals. They fight for the ideal of earning money, or for the ideal of survival. They fight, they bleed, and they die upon the ground because they truly believe they are right. The moment an ideal cracks, the moment it is broken, the human loses himself. They will die believing in their ideals, but they will break and wither if their beliefs are broken. The Kyuubi's head shook. Human spirits are unfathomably strong, but when they break, rarely can they be brought back to their previous shine. It's just that, I don't understand, Naruto muttered. Do you want me to live? Do you want me to die? I want you to die, Naruto Uzumaki, but not now, Kurama replied firmly. You are no different than those who came before, but at the moment, you are my salvation from losing what little the sage gifted me. My name, it was his gift to me, do you understand that? My identity, my miserable and pitiable self, he gifted it to me, and I'll be damned if I lose it to my baser instincts. His tail swished and flickered, as the rot that had accumulated, the blood that reached Naruto's ankles, it began to burn. I am the purifying flames of the world. I am the bearer of malice and its executioner. I am Kurama. My task, my objective, my ideal, is to defeat malice, to end a cycle of viciousness and death. My cause is just, no matter the blood I will spill to complete it, I will never falter upon this. The Kyuubi roared as the ground cracked, crimson chakra erupting and tearing apart a rotten mount of corpses that looked bleary-eyed in Naruto's direction, their looks so familiar it made the boy's soul shudder. How many kids were there among those corpses? There were too many to count. What is your purpose, Naruto Uzumaki? What is your dream? For without a dream, without an objective, you might as well be dead. Only through our dreams and ideals, do we find the strength to go on. Yujito roared as she slammed her shoulder against the nibi itself, making the demon wince as the cat-like paws tried to slam down on the small jounin for the Baijuyu and failed. Like an annoying rat, it was difficult to get a clear hit on the woman, but even then she knew it was just a matter of time. A Baijuyu could not grow tired, a human on the other hand. Naruto winced, bringing his right hand to his temple. I want to become. I want to protect my teammates, I want to become stronger, but why? I'll be, just you wait. What did he want to become? I want to become. What? What did he want to become? They'll have to recognize me if I become. What was it that he was missing? They'll recognize me, just you wait. I'll be the best. What? 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 What was he missing? Naruto screamed as he pressed both of his hands against the sides of his head. He screamed as he felt his very soul shudder and crack, his mind splinter as the walls and the halls of rotten rust and blood that were the confines of his mind, suddenly broke. My dream is, to make friends. He said out loud, and to keep them no matter what. How could he make friends, if he did not trust anyone? And so Naruto Uzumaki screamed once more until his throat turned raw, as the bubbling sensation that surrounded him became sheer agony and pain while he pushed away the burning mess of cerulean chakra that was the nibi from the confines of his mind. But a little bit remained behind, because he was so tired of fighting, so tired. The sin of death, when the soul departs, misery comes away first, peeled to grant the soul ascension. Then comes the acknowledgement that they have indeed departed, and the sadness of those left behind burns away gently in the light of a pale blue candlelight. Without it, a soul cannot reach the next stage. Unless stripped of all its sins, a soul cannot move on and be reborn pure. Yujito was bleeding from her sides, charred flesh covering her body. She shuddered and opened her eyes to the devastation wrought. She looked around in fear, touching her body as she felt the spasms of her sore muscles make her stand up in pain. She was back. She was out of that nightmare. She could feel the burning sensation deep within her stomach, the blood oozing out from her mouth as she felt weak, terribly so. What she saw first, however. It was a pale-skinned boy, holding a paintbrush and a murderous gaze over her. Move and you will die, he remarked. The seal is still fresh. Do not move. With a terrifying thought, she looked towards her shoulder and nearly screamed in fear. The iron seal was no longer present, but a different seal stood instead near her belly button. She could still hear the screams echo through the clearing, even as the unknown shinobi wearing a red mantle kept on drawing upon her stomach. She exhaled, feeling weakness cloud her thoughts. Maybe she could rest for a while? But, what of the Kyuubi? Her eyes went past the devastation around her, towards a burning cyclone of crimson flames against which a giant orange toad was currently guzzling water. A giant toad could only mean Jiraiya of the Sunin. She murmured. Indeed, the boy replied. You should be grateful. Had he not intervened, this would have turned ugly fast. He's of Konoha, Yujito muttered. Once more, you are correct, the boy replied. I am too. I also took the liberty of applying 25 variations of an explosive tag on your new seal, which will activate depending on a variety of factors I will not disclose. The boy's smile was positively ferocious in its frightening ability. So, Do not attempt to run if you value your life, all right. She swallowed nervously and nodded quite furiously, hoping the boy would just stop smiling because it was scaring her. Jiraiya hissed in frustration. The seal, how had it possibly been torn so badly? No, it had to be worse than that. The tails were still sprouting. He was at 5 currently, and already the clouds were turning crimson and raining down scathing hot water. The ground melted beneath his feet, and for all Jiraiya knew, maybe, the chakra-suppressing seals he had on his person would not be enough. Gamabunta! Get him in midair! He bellowed to the Lord of the Toad Summons, who grumbled back. You think it's easy? The giant toad's blade emerged as it sliced forward, the tip crushing the ground as the Kyuubi hierarchy simply ducked it and then began to climb over it with unparalleled speed. That was when Gamabunta smiled. Got ya, bugger. He threw his own sword in the air, where it began to spin furiously. Naruto's five-tailed state screamed as it jumped away from the blade, and in that instant, Jiraiya jumped and slammed all 27 chakra suppression seals he had on his person on the stupid brat that was Minato's son. The corrosive chakra of the Kyuubi sizzled furiously, and then finally came undone. One would have been enough, but as his sensei used to tell him, better safe than sorry. Moreover, with 27 chakra seals on him, he doubted he'd have to fight the Kyuubi again for a long time if the boy didn't become comatose, that was. He landed then and took a deep breath of relief. The biggest trouble out of the way, he wondered where the rest of the shinobi were. Shikamaru's sight was blurry, as he watched the enemy shinobi known as Feudo move closer with a sadistic grin on his face. He closed his eyes and sighed. It was too troublesome to try to fight more. He had lost and he was going to die. Maybe, in doing so, he'd see that troublesome blonde again. Even if he did, it would be too troublesome. He still had to apologize properly to Ami. The girl had done her best to enter the team, even listening to one of his offhanded comments about how only blonde-haired women were as troublesome as she was. She had become blonde because of him. In the end, the girl had just wanted to be accepted. He waited anxiously for the attack to come, and as it didn't, he opened his eyes again. The man was holding his throat as if he was being choked, frothing from his mouth as his eyes widened in disbelief. Shikamaru winced as a cold hand touched his shoulder. Are you all right? Ami asked carefully, appearing from the corner of the tree. Ami. He coughed out, blood splattering on the ground as he nearly fell over. You were supposed to help Kiba and... Ami held him firmly down against the trunk, quickly unwrapping a painkiller from one of his own pouches. She was still a genin, and thus didn't have one. Save your breath, she murmured. Hibachi got Chuji to safety, he's going to help out Kiba and Shino. What did you do to him? Shikamaru asked then, watching the convulsing body of Feudo. I threw a senbon needle coated with poison inside his mouth, she muttered back. You know what they say of kunoichi and poison, right? He chuckled nervously. Right, thanks, Ami. I'm your teammate, she whispered back, carefully helping him up and passing one of her arms behind his back and one of his own over her shoulder. What else am I here for? Thanks all the same. Then, he fell into blissed unconsciousness as the painkiller took effect. Haku didn't know how long she had been running with the Hyuga on her back. She knew the enemy was getting closer and closer. Her sandals cracked against the surface of a nearby branch, and soon the barking of the Inyazuka's dog came closer. If only there was some water, anywhere. In that moment, a thunder streaked across the sky as if answering her call. Kami had replied with rain. She slowly deposited Hinata down on the ground, smiling at the perplexed Hyuga. The two Konoha shinobi who were pursuing her stilled too, as the Abarame spoke. Have you stopped running? Give Hinata back. Kiba screamed. Hinata. We'll save you, don't worry. Get away from me, you demons. The girl screamed back. Kiba-san, it is of no use, Shino remarked, slowly removing his glasses as his Kikaicha began to buzz excitedly. We have to take her by force. His sleeves flapped as the swarms within his body and vest erupted, guided by his chakra as he twisted his arms like a maestro of an orchestra. The swarm buzzed as it flew through the thick rain, their strain resistant to water and Sutan techniques, and crashed against a wall of ice. Soon, it stopped raining. Because it began to snow. I am of the Yuki clan, Haku said calmly. I am thus sorry. Ice formed on the ground within a mere instant, freezing both Kiba and Shino's legs. But your death is now inescapable. The wave of cold froze the swarms of Shino in an instant, making the Kikaichu all fall on the ground like tiny insect-filled popsicles. Shino mentally cursed. There went his water-resistant hive. I don't care what your clan you're from. Kiba yelled back. Hinata's my friend. She belongs to my team, my pack. And I will get her back, no matter the cost. Akamaru. The dog yipped as both of them suddenly ate a red pill, Akamaru's pill being thrown by Kiba himself. You can have all the bloodlines in the world. You can belong to whatever clan you want. But you can't take a member out of an Inyazuka's pack without paying the price in blood. Jinja can be henge, so Taro. The ice cracked and splintered as Akamaru and Kiba became one. An enormous twin-headed dog with white fur roared as it pounced forward, twisting its body into a spiral of death and devastation. In that moment, Shino broke the ice, holding his feet down with a kunao and charged, flanking the enemy. Haku-san. To your left. Damn it, Hinata. Kiba's roar came through both heads. Stop helping the enemy. The kunoichi spun, waves of frozen air glinting dangerously for an instant, before they swept straight towards him as she graciously avoided the typhoon of fangs and claws that was Kiba. Shino had barely the time to bring both of his arms up, that he slammed back against a nearby tree and froze to the spot. He shuddered as the sudden chill made his heart skip a beat. He felt cold, his temperature dropping as his heart stopped. He received a sudden shock a moment later and exhaled loudly in relief. Kikaicha within one's own body could generate enough electricity to jumpstart a stopped heart after all. He was glad he was an Abarame. If only he had a way to get Hinata to stop delivering information to the enemy. The Hyaga's eyes could see chakra through surfaces, and his Kikaicha had small chakra systems the size of a tenketsu. If only he had another shinobi, he could use them as a cover for his swarm. The moment Hibachi arrived running from the side, kunao in hand and charging at Hinata, he knew he had found his running wall of tenketsu. Haku hit the genin with a sharp sword of ice in the sides, as she ducked another incoming attack from the Inyazuka. The genin looked with wide eyes at the pointed finger of Hinata against him, the Hyaga having warned the kunoichi of his advance, and as he coughed out blood, he fell down. The next instant, Shino's Kikaicha rose buzzing and shot through the air, attaching to Hinata's entire frame to suck on her chakra. Hinata screamed as Haku spun around trying to understand what was going on, but before she could react, the distraction proved fatal as Kiba hadn't stopped attacking at all. The giant paw of the Inyazuka tore through the kunoichi's sides, sending her to tumble and crash on the ground before she heard her bones snap from the strength of the impact. She coughed out blood and, beneath the downpour of rain, exhaled her last breath. As her vision clouded, and the chill of the Shinigami came to her soul, she couldn't help but start crying together with the rain. She could no longer be of use to Zabuza-sama. That sin would send her to hell. Sakura ignored the feeling of dread as she ran across the hospital's corridors, reaching the room and opening the door with a strong bang. Heavily bandaged, Naruto was soundly sleeping attached to heart monitors, with Tsunade herself looking over his medical charts. Next to her was the Toad Sage and Sigh. She exclaimed in relief, bringing a hand to her heart as she tried to calm it down. Hush, Tsunade barked back, before looking at the monitors. Cherry, Sai smiled at her gently. Has Harem Lord added Psalm? Then Fu entered the room too. Is Naruto eating with us? Why did I even ask? Sai muttered, calmly taking out a piece of parchment and scribbling down on it. All right, only teammates in here for the moment, Tsunade said a moment later, gesturing Fu and Jiraiya to leave. And someone should warn Shizune, I'll be busy for a while, correcting mistakes my stupid teammate did, she grumbled. Jiraiya sheepishly scratched the back of his head, before leaving. Fu remained outside in wait. Hokage-sama? Sakura asked, carefully moving to the other side of Naruto's bed and gently grabbing his hand. Is he? He's fine, somewhat, Tsunade exhaled. I don't know how much fine you'd like him to be though, she shook her head. What I can tell you is that he suffered through severe chakra depletion, had multiple burns all across his body and in agony just until we hooked him up with enough painkillers to douse an elephant, and he nearly woke up even then. So he'll wake up? Sakura asked again, holding tightly onto Naruto's hand. Tomorrow I'll lower his pain medications, but for today, it's best if he sleeps through it. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Sakura replied with relief clearly discernible in her voice. She looked towards Fu. Can she come in too? Don't make a noise, the Hokage warned as she nodded, before moving to leave. If he manages to stave off the painkillers and wakes up, tell a nurse to call me, understood? Yes, Hokage-sama, Sakura nodded firmly. Tsunade left then, leaving behind Sakura, Fu, and Sai to stare at one another around Naruto's hospital bed. Sai, it's good to see you, Sakura muttered as she slowly let go of Naruto's hand to walk around the bed and hug the raven-haired teen. How was it, 1 year of apprenticeship with Jiraiya of the Sunin? Perverted, he remarked with a stone face. Sakura's forehead sported a tick mark. Are you abusing the Hokage's order not to make a fuss? Guilty, he replied with a light smirk. She smiled at that, before taking a chair from the outside and placing it near Naruto's bed. There always were 2 chairs in a private hospital bedroom, thus the need for a third. 2 Umbu stood guard outside, as she slid to close the door of the hospital room. She sat down once more next to Naruto, and gripped his hand strongly with her fingers. She sighed. You think he does it on purpose? Sakura asked carefully. To be hospitalized, I mean. He was not the only one of his team, Sai said. Shikamaru Nara and Chuji Akimichi are currently in intensive care and another one of the team died. Had Jiraiya-sama not received an urgent warning to head towards the battle at the Valley of the End, we would have missed the entire battle. He'd have won anyway, Sakura replied. Naruto's like that, he never gives up. Actually, Cherry. Sai murmured. He was losing control of the Bijiryu. Sakura looked stricken as her grip intensified, her skin turning pale as her eyes widened in disbelief. She exhaled after a few seconds, closing her eyes. I'll turn gray-haired before I hit 20, if I worry like this every time, she muttered. He was sealed again. Fu asked then carefully, looking at Naruto with a slightly worried face. Jiraiya-sama took care of that, and applied a temporary chakra suppression seal, Sai said. Applying a complete seal will take a few days, but it will not be as good as his old one. What of his old seal? Can't they redo that? Unfortunately, it requires a human soul to be sacrificed to the Shinigami willingly, Sai replied. And the technique to call forth the death god is known to only one living person as of now. His eyes grew darker. Orochimaru. Itachi was perplexed. Toby was humming a happy note as they were heading towards the cage summit, and yet he couldn't help but notice there was something strange about his partner. Orochimaru was not in Uzushiagaku. Nope, Toby shook his head. I wondered, why didn't you take me with you first? I wanted to have a private eye-to-eye chat with the man, know why he'd betray the organization and all. Toby chuckled. Toby's a good boy like that, you know. Itachi raised an eyebrow, but it lasted little when he saw Zetsu appearing from the ground in his plant trap form. We have a problem, the flytrap said. Orochimaru betrayed the organization, he began attacking Konoha Shinobi earlier than intended. The backstabber should be eaten. The land of the sky is not at full potential, the backstabber didn't complete it. We have yet to claim the Galil Stone and to conquer Raran. I say we eat the backstabber. Toby is really sad about that. Toby exclaimed, clapping his hands. What should we do, Zetsu-chan? Orochimaru was a bad boy. I can't believe it. Zetsu's sweat dropped. Yes, ahem, he coughed slightly. We should eat the backstabber. I think we should concentrate on completing our objectives. Eating the backstabber is fine too. You two are heading towards the Hokage summit to make peace talk. Of course, we are not making peace with the world. They accepted the Kiri-Mizu cage after the rebellion. They have no legal ground to pursue Pain-sama's reign now. As expected, you are to represent us, Itachi, Toby, use the forehead protectors of Omegakuer when in the Land of Iron. Act diplomatic or I will eat you. Toby will be a good boy. Toby clapped his hands excitedly once more. He will be such a smart boy, they'll think he's a snake beneath his skin. Yes, you do that, Zetsu replied calmly. Itake, make sure he doesn't talk too much. Itake nodded once. Zetsu disappeared in the ground. The two remained immobile for a moment more. Shall we proceed according to our plan, Madara? Why not? Tobi shrugged. I'm a good boy after all, and you heard Zetsu, Orochimaru will probably attack the Cage Summit, better for us to be prepared to stop him before he does something bad. The masked shinobi shook his head. Really, bad Orochimaru? I can't believe it. Itake exhaled. He wondered why, every now and then, Madara had to act like Tobi even when alone. Then again, the Cage Summit would be interesting. Chapter 50, Recover Your Purpose. He felt a light pressure on his left hand, as he weakly opened his eyes. He exhaled, and then he winced. His muscles hurt, his skin felt itchy and hot. The sweat that had pooled on his back and attached the gown of the hospital to his skin made him uncomfortable. The gentle warmth he felt on his hand however felt good, even refreshing. He twitched his index finger slightly, eliciting a moan from the owner of said warmth. His eyes cracked open a bit more, to reveal the sleeping pink-haired girl that was his teammate sleeping soundly with her head against the sides of his bed. There were 2 other chairs next to his bed, but those were empty. He closed his eyes slowly once more, the feeling of tiredness getting the better of him. He breathed in slowly, letting the air push through his parched throat and into his paining lungs. He felt as if millions of needles had stabbed him repeatedly, and his bones creaked as he tried to grasp the straw of a water cup on his bed desk. He was so thirsty. That movement got a reaction. It was a twitch at first, but soon Sakura's head shot up immediately, her eyes wide and alert. She looked at him with a ragged breath for a single fleeting instant, and then tightened her grip on his hand with both of hers. I'm so glad, she croaked out with her eyes shining from unshed tears. You're awake, her shoulders trembled slightly. Hey, he muttered weakly. You. She began, but then hesitated. Sighs back, she said then. He and Jiraiya-sama that is, they saved you. Ah, he closed his eyes. So, they saw. You nearly went full Kyuubi, believing Sai, Sakura swallowed nervously. And they said your seal, it was gone. How could you, not say anything? I don't know. He hazarded slowly, earning himself a bitter smile from Sakura. Yeah, I suppose you don't, you baka. She slowly stood up, pushing with her right hand's fingers one of her locks back behind her ear, before slowly bowing down to reach his lips. She kissed him gently, her eyes closed as she just needed to feel him alive. She detached herself a moment later, her breath slow and calm. Don't you ever do something like that again, Naruto. Understood. Do I get another kiss if I do it anyway? Sakura smiled sweetly, clenching her fists. No, but you get a fist to your face once you're back up on your feet the next time. Sakura-chan, that's unfair. He exclaimed, before suddenly feeling a deep sharp pain in his chest as he began to cough, letting out a spray of blood on his right hand that had come up to his mouth. Naruto. Sakura's eyes widened. Right, nurse. I need a nurse in here right now. Sakura said with her low-keyed voice as she headed outside. Naruto's cough subsided just as Sakura returned with Shizuan. The brown-haired woman checked his heartbeat and some other stuff he had no idea about, before calming down the fussing Sakura who remained worriedly there. Sakura looked at him for a moment more, before finally making a startled gasp as if she had just then remembered something. Right. I need to warn Sai and hope Fu hasn't eaten everything in the fridge. Sakura was about to hurry outside, when she stilled at the doorway. I'll be back as fast as I can. She exclaimed towards him, before disappearing from view in a dash. She could have taken the window, Shizuan said quietly, before eyeing Naruto, who just made an awkward smile back in her direction. So, you are healing along nicely. A few days and you'll be up and about, ready to escort Tsunade-sama to Iron Country. He blinked towards the woman, who just smiled at him. I'm Shizuan Kato. I was Tsunade-sama's apprentice before she became Go-Dame. I won't be following you, but if you want to know more about Tsunade-sama's habits to better protect her. The woman trailed off. He just looked at her. Is everything all right? Why do you fight? He croaked out carefully. What makes you stand, even when wounded to the brim of death? He looked at the hand Sakura had held a moment earlier. This warmth, he smiled slightly. It's good, isn't it? I beg your pardon. Shizun frowned. She had no idea what the boy was saying, but maybe he was still under shock or slightly taken by the painkillers they had dosed him as if he were an elephant after all. What do you fight for? Naruto asked then. The village? Your Hokage? Your family? The village is my home, Shizun replied. I would be sad to see it destroyed, and life is precious, when possible, it should be safeguarded. She looked at him with a slightly worried look then. Did something happen on the mission, Uzumaki-san? I was asked for which reason I fought, he muttered. I think the Nibijin hierarchy fought because of her duty to the village, but I'm fighting for something else. He closed his eyes for a moment. He shuddered. I can't remember. It might be a mild amnesia, Shizun remarked carefully. You had some quite dangerous bruises all over your head and a few bits of your skull were actually dented, she added. Which should be impossible, but I stopped believing it when I became Tsunade-sama's apprentice. She clenched her medical chart slightly. If you don't know why, then let me ask you, the girl before, Sakura, she's your teammate, right? He nodded hesitantly. You like her? He blinked, and then slowly gave another nod. Then, even if you don't remember, you could be fighting to protect her smile. To protect her smile? He parried perplexed. Some people fight to protect those precious to them, to guard them from harm. Being a shinobi, it isn't only about fighting for the village, but also defending the villagers, those we hold dear, safeguarding the innocent, healing the wounded. The duty to the village is usually never the first thing that comes to mind, when you ask someone why they fight. He shuddered and laid back against the pillow, his eyes now transfixed on the ceiling. To protect those precious to me? Yes, Shizun nodded. That's a good ideal, isn't it? And what happens, he asked then slowly, what happens when there's no one left to protect? Shizun's smile faltered for a moment, before it came back. We grieve those we could not save, and then we find more people that are precious to us. Thank you, he murmured, just as he heard the window open from the outside to admit both Sakura and Sai inside. Sai didn't look much different to him. He still was the pale-skinned boy with dark hair he had met in the classroom of the academy, but now there was a spruce of color in a dark red mantle that hung from his shoulders. He also had a dark red hat the type artists wear when drawing paintings outside, which in his opinion, was horrible. It was a pleasure, Shizun replied with a smile. Sai looked at the scene and blinked, before turning to look at Sakura. He is worthy of his title, Cherry. He just added a nurse to his harem. Naruto coughed, as the chuckle that menaced to escape his throat became painful. Sakura didn't even hit Sai, instead blurring right to Naruto's side to hold onto his hand. The nurse checked on him for a moment more, a light blush on her face before leaving to get some painkillers. Hey Sai, Naruto grinned weakly at his other teammate. Long time no see. Please avoid destroying the grammar of our tongue, Sai quipped back. It has been a while, dickless. Likewise, pervert. Boys, play nice. Sakura chided, comfortably sitting on the chair next to Naruto. So, are there any kinky lords or harem cherries around? Sai asked calmly, raising his right eyebrow and wiggling it. You had 1 year after all? Naruto sputtered. Since when did Sai wiggle eyebrows? Sakura turned completely red. Sai. No. We're too young. And we went on different patrols. Live fast, go young, Sai deadpanned. That's Jiraiya-sama's saying. Go, young. Naruto asked with a curious gaze on his face. Sai nodded. He said, fresh is better, and that, a young woman a day makes old age okay, or something like that. That pervert. Sakura's hair began to rise as she clenched her teeth furiously. Sai. What did he teach you apart these depravities? Jiraiya-sama taught me sealing, summoning, and earth techniques, Sai listed emotionlessly. He also taught me how to illustrate porn for his novels and... Sai actually produced 2 of said books from a small seal within his mantle. He said to offer them to you and Naruto as special editions, in case you needed some imagination for future sexual counsel. Sakura's utter redness and rage suddenly disappeared, as if she had attained nirvana. She smiled a small simple smile and then slowly walked out. Both Naruto and Sai shuddered at the same time. It felt as if a deathly chill had just passed by. Jiraiya of the Sun-In felt the Shinigami creep on him the moment he settled down his telescope to peep on the women in the hot springs. The last thing he saw before falling into the scathing water of the springs surrounded by female kunoichi was the blurring fist of a pink-haired banshee hissing insults at him, as if she wanted to drag him to the underworld. Pervert. The screams of the kunoichi did the rest. Naruto carefully grabbed the proffered book while Sakura was out, and slowly opened it to the first page. He flipped a page. He read it. He flipped another. He read it all the way down to the bottom. He began to hum in contentment as he read, tapping with his finger on the back of the cover as he watched the images sexy but not overtly pornographic and kept on flipping page after page. He stopped every now and then to admire one of the artworks, and he was just about to find out what Zio would do of dirty with Zeruko and Zujito when Sakura took away his book, making a nervous and cranky smile as she slowly and methodically lowered it on the bed desk near him. The gift was fine. Sigh. She uttered that out through clenched teeth and mechanically. But if you gift porn again, I will have to cleanse you like I did with your sensei. Her smile was now perfectly expressing her desire for slaughter, which made Sai shudder and nod hastily. Very well. Sakura smiled warmly as she exclaimed that in her low raucous voice. Now, tell us something about what else you learn, something that isn't perverted at least. They made small talk, but it was nice. The 3 of them spoke in turn for a bit, before Shizun returned with the pain medications. Naruto fell asleep soon afterwards, with Sakura gently passing her fingers through his hair. She smiled briefly at the sight of the boy's even breathing, before whispering to Sai. Hey, how long will you stay? Enough, Sai replied. My sensei will be escorting the Godame to the cage meeting. It is highly probable we will be taking missions together again. Sakura nodded with a bright smile. I'm glad. She swiped away a tear from her right eye. I'm really happy you're back, Sai. The boy nodded. It's good to be back. Listen. Sakura began carefully. Can I ask you a question? Sai raised an eyebrow, but nodded once more. Ask away. What's going to happen to Naruto now? Her voice was slightly cracked, as if the worry was eating her out alive. He lost control of the Kyuubi, didn't he? What are they going to do? Sai frowned, before shrugging. Jiraiya-sama will probably write another one and make it better. He had over 10 years of time to think of improvements for the seal that held the Kyuubi down. I'm sure he'll manage something before he departs. Sakura sighed in relief, swiping away a bead of sweat from her forehead. Good, it's really good to know. Sai remained quiet afterwards, looking from Naruto to Sakura and back. He mulled it over for a moment, before suddenly understanding. His face twitched in a slight grin. Cherry. Yes. He asked Sakura a question. Sakura turned beet red and then, calmly, defenestrated Sai with a powerful punch. You don't ask that to a lady. She added towards the open window, with a slightly peeved voice. Then she turned on herself and, huffing, sat back down next to Naruto. Really, asking if she and Naruto had, there was no way. She still had to get married, after all, and they were too young to consume That particular thought made her blush. She fainted then, blood gushing out of her nose. The Toad Sage was not happy. After escaping a representation of the underworld in the form of a pink banshee and a later horde of angry kunoichi, he was currently in his workshop trying to work out the last kinks of the new seal. Jiraiya furiously walked in circles, as symbols upon symbols etched on the walls around him glowed lightly. His muttering was furious, and mostly incoherent. The seal he had to place on Naruto was to be airtight and foolproof, yet he couldn't just saw off the Kyuubi's chakra abruptly. In the best-case scenario, the shock to his chakra coils would kill him. 5 per 3, he whispered. Add 2, make 17. Divide because of the uneven. No, it might go against. Is it 9 or 10? Maybe 12. He shook his head. Double or triple, no gaps. He slammed his head against the wall nearby. Think, there has to be something. He began to make slow calculative circles around the room once more, looking at the bits and pieces of ink all around. His gaze narrowed on a particular bit. If I make the 6 a 9, then turn it upside down. He winced. No, that's stupid. If you turn upside down a 9 you get a 6, not an upturned 9. He blinked. But if the exchange is parallel. He began to chuckle. Oh. He clapped his hands excitedly. It will be perfect. Matching chakra to output, it would count double and. He frowned. No, double would not be the full potential, 1 to 9. He winced. That still didn't feel right. Maybe 1 to 16. He shook his head. That would be too much. All right, 1 to 10. He nodded to himself. Yes, the 10 to 1 ration would be perfect. Jiraiya snapped his fingers, summoning a long scroll that had a toad atop it. Jirotora looked extremely pissed, his cheeks full. He had been eating when Jiraiya had summoned him, most likely. OHI. I need the key blanked. I've got a new master seal to write. The toad sage exclaimed. And I need it fast. It already is, the toad grumbled as it unfastened itself, to reveal a long white scroll. The seal was torn apart and the key was rendered thus useless. You could have warned me beforehand, Jiraiya grumbled under his breath. The white-haired Sunin shook his head. It doesn't matter anyway, I knew I was a genius for a reason. Ah. He chuckled as he grabbed a brush and an inkpot. Don't distract me, Jirotora. The toad atop the scroll just grumbled quietly, but said nothing else. As the toad sage began to work, elsewhere Shimura Danzo was silently walking his way with the Prajna group across the land of the sky. Orochimaru had left. The majority of the shinobi within the land were but small fries, easy to deal with. He just had to reach the control room. The Prajna group members all had their objectives, ranging from destabilization of specific sectors to placing explosive tags on the main firing arrays. Slowly, Danzo crawled through a duct of air filled with grime and dust, careful to avoid making even the barest of noises. His fingers slowly moved forward an inch at a time, as his eyes peered through the dim conduit. He could feel a light breeze from the right, as he reached a crossroad. He ignored it in favor of going left, where the air felt hotter and staler. He stopped suddenly, exhaling a light gust of wind that breezed through the passage lifting up the dust. A set of powerful explosive tags were primed to thin steel wires, invisible to the naked eye. If he had the Sharingan, he would have probably seen them already. He lacked his other arm, and that made everything far more difficult. Then again, what use was there for Hashirama's cells without a Sharingan inserted? Still, it had been a good enough payoff. He couldn't let the Sharingan in his body in the hands of other powers in play, and he could not fake his death without dealing with the limb. Orochimaru knew about it, he had been the one to insert it. He carefully took out a brush from his inner pockets, and untapped a small white vial filled with a clear crystalline liquid. Danzo exhaled, and then began to retrace every single line of ink with the liquid. As if done with magic, the ink began to turn transparent and disappear without a single drop seeping through or dribbling downwards. If it did after all, everything would blow to pieces. He wasn't a seal master, but he was one of the best seal users, and his knowledge was all practical, for the battlefield. Tobirama-sensei had taught him how to disarm explosive tags and shinobi mines, the latter of which had taken the life of one of his teammates insufferable Uchiha, of course activating the Sharingan required chakra. The shinobi mines were a mean to capture enemy ninja, they stuck to the surface of someone who walked on them or beneath them while using chakra, and the next instant they detonated if chakra flowed again. The lucky ones ended with a mine on their foot, his teammate got one on his face and activated his eyes on reflex. He moved the paintbrush to the other tag, and repeated the same brush strokes. He could feel the beads of sweat slowly collect on his brows, as he stilled for a second his hand to draw a small breath, before continuing. Another stroke, a small correction with black ink this time, and then the first two tags primed one to the other turned inert. Concentrating chakra to his fingertips, he sliced with wind the small thin wire, which tried to coil back. He pinched the extremity with his fingers, and then slowly brought his mouth closer to bite on it and hold it still. Tags were generally lined in order. Therefore, the wire passed through all of them at least once, to detonate in bulk. He began to work on explosive tag number 3, quietly cursing the name of the people he detested. He was going to show Hiruzen, who was an old crone, when he returned to Konoha with the land of the sky under his control or with the tale of its destruction. They'd plead for him to become Hokage. He worked his way through the remaining tags within the next 5 hours. He exhaled once, and then painstakingly wiped away the sweat once more from his face. He carefully sent a gust of wind forth, and once more, he mentally cursed. Tags had been primed, placed, and hidden beneath a hand of gray paint. These had to be pressure-reliant, because they hid with a light slick plastic top that was colored gray. He had been lucky to see one because of the chipped paint. He slowly got on his back and brought his only hand up to the ceiling of the conduit. He narrowed his eyes. It looked clean enough. He hesitantly raised his head and double-checked, before starting to pin his hand to the ceiling of the duct. His body followed next. Carefully, holding his entire form attached to it, he began to crawl forward at a snail's pace. He knew he was going in the right direction by the sheer amount of traps. He just hoped there would be an end soon. He remembered doing these sort of things in his youth, but back then they felt so easy and his body wasn't far over the prime of his youth too. He disengaged from the second minefield with relative ease, and finally came upon a vent connecting to a room below. He carefully unscrewed the corners of the vent, silently moving it aside. The room seemed clean, sterile even, and without doors. It looked more like an inner compartment or a prison cell. Inside, curled and with his arms surrounding his knees, was a young boy with long reddish-brown hair wearing a blue bandana. He had rather thick eyebrows and blue eyes, and a mole under the left eye. He was wearing a cyan blue gi with a cream-colored vest over it, blue shorts, and dark arm and leg bands. Danzo crept inside the room, remaining anchored to the ceiling and looking around. Yes, this was a prison cell. He probably did need someone to guide him to the control room. Decision made, he jumped down and pinned the boy against the wall, holding his hand to the boy's mouth. "Scream, and you die," he hissed. He had no trouble creating a gust of wind from his mouth, but he did miss the use of his arm. "Are you familiar with the layout of this place?" She was lacking Adam's apple. Danzo's eyes narrowed both, but he said nothing as the girl dressed as a boy tried to nod. "I will let go of your mouth now, but know that I can still easily kill you where you stand," he replied carefully. The girl remained quiet as he removed his hand. "Where is the control room?" She swallowed nervously. He raised an eyebrow in wait. There isn't one," she meekly whispered. "How does it move then?" he asked, growing impatient. "The Zero Tails," Amaru murmured. It's a monster. I don't know why Shino-sensei decided to free it, but it's the only thing that can make the land of the sky move." She shuddered. "That thing, it isn't natural." "Explain," he said, his ears straining to capture any word, or the passage of a guard outside the room. "Shino-sensei, he's a survivor of the land of the sky, the real land of the sky, and not this cheap imitation. He said the Zero Tails was created, it was created to power up this floating fortress, Anchor Vantian. It's a dark beast, please, tell me you're here to destroy it." "That thing, it has to be the reason Shino-sensei became mad." "We destroyed this city in the Second Shinobi War," Danzo whispered back. "How was it brought back?" "We tore apart your land once, but we could not scavenge your technology." Amaru bit her lips. "I don't know. I'm not from the land of the sky. Shino-sensei, he took me in after he healed me." Tears began to streak down her face. He growled in annoyance. He detested tears. "When he said he was going to destroy Konoha, I tried to act, but he captured me and brought me here, in the prisons." "So you are loyal to the land of fire?" It's still my home," she meekly murmured back. "Very well," Danzo nodded. "How far are we from the Zero Tails?" "Not much," Amaru acquiesced. "The Zero Tails feeds on negative emotions, the prisons are close to that thing on purpose." It's just, you shouldn't fight it head on. I saw it feed once and, Kami, it was horrible. She sobbed, falling down on her knees as her frame racked with tremors. I still hear the screams, she whispered. He slapped her then, getting down on one knee to lock gaze with the girl. Listen, girl. He began with ill-contained anger. It always worked to seem as if you were losing your patience, when interrogating someone. I want to know where it is and how to get to it. Steel your heart and answer me. The fate of the land of fire rests upon you, do not fall now to despair. He hissed those words, and with that, Amaru looked back at the old crinkled shinobi and swallowed her fears. You won't be able to get close, there's a lock that opens with a combination, and then you have to answer an ever-changing question concerning a medical issue to reach the central core. What? She nodded fiercely. There's all sort of security in place but I should be able to get you in. Please. She looked at him with a light blush, let me help you. Danzo blinked slowly. His original plan involved simply killing the girl once her usefulness would have come less, but if the security was that strict. Do you have shinobi training? No, she swallowed. I'm a medic. Shino-sensei taught me. Danzo nodded to himself. Fine, he carefully moved towards the door. Listen well, when I give you an order, you will follow it to the letter, understood? Amaru nodded furiously and then walked closer to him. I'm Amaru. He gave her a curt nod. I am, Prajna, he replied, tapping at his mask. Swiftly, he drew a set of ink circles on the door of the prison that shone, before ink scribbles appeared all around it and began to swallow the center of the metallic plate. It cracked and broke, silently creating a passageway through the door. Danzo took a step outside and swiftly flung a kunao at the guard sitting on a nearby chair along the corridor. The kunao struck the man in the jugular, spraying blood on the nearby white wall as he fell with a dull thud. The rest of the prison was empty. Move out, he said looking towards the girl. There was one thing he still didn't understand. Why was the girl blushing? Kuratsuka was lingering in the Land of Iron's quarters the samurai had assigned to the delegation from IWA. She and Akatsuka were both playing guards, while her grandfather seemed to be going on one of his usual jumping sprees of excitement. She supposed it had everything to do with Tsunade healing his hip in the peace agreements, because there simply was no other reason why the man was actually jumping around in glee. It's going to be wonderful, Unaki muttered. Ah, yes indeed, his eyes shone as he looked outside, to the snowing country. So wonderful, I wonder if I'm dreaming. What's gotten into Gramps? Kuratsuki asked in a tiny whisper to Akatsuki, only for him to shrug. Maybe he's in love. In love? With who? Kuratsuka blinked. She looked at her grandfather. The only reason she could come up with was the recent change in Hokage Konoha, which meant... Wait, hadn't the slug son healed his hip? Hey, Gramps, Kuratsuka began. Do you have a crush on Tsunade Senju? Unaki sputtered out indignantly. What? No. I don't have one, you insufferable brat. The old cage retorted heatedly, turning around to stare at his granddaughter. But you will see. Oh yes. It's going to be glorious when the Konoha's delegation arrives. Unaki chuckled. Really great. He began to hum a song. There will be fireworks. Oh, right, Kuratsuki. The man asked then, you do have a nice kimono, right? Kuratsuka felt extremely uncomfortable at that question. Why are you asking me, Gramps? She really hoped her grandfather hadn't turned senile all of a sudden. She knew her father would probably succeed him, but if he did something strange during the meeting between Cage. Never mind, we'll buy one anyway, there was a throaty chuckle and a maniacal glee in his words. Ah. I can't wait. I can't. He looked out once more, to the snow and the wind that blew across the always frozen country. Come quick, Konoha, he said, his smile becoming feral. I cannot wait to swallow your country whole. Then he laughed once more. Akatsuka slowly crept out of the room, followed by Kuratsuki a moment later. When her grandfather was in that mood, it was best to let him vent. Naruto opened his eyes blearily. He had heard a noise as if the door had slid open. It was the middle of the night, but his gaze didn't falter as he took in the appearance of a dark brown-haired boy. By his outfit, he looked like one of the nurses. There was a moment of silence as he tried to recall a reason for such a late-night visit, but it was then that he remembered. The boy was that Hyaga, right? I want to talk to you, he said crisply, taking careful steps forward. Keep your voice low, or the umbu outside will hear. He added then. He looked at his appearance, and grimaced. Why did he look so pale and shaken? Naruto tensed in the event of Niji trying something funny, but when the boy simply took a seat next to him, he was bewildered. Did you know, Niji said slowly, that Hinata loved you? His eyes widened in surprise. What? He croaked out. She loved you so much, that when you turned out to be a monster in human skin, she went mad. Niji continued, with his voice soft and devoid of anger. Not only did she stop recognizing everyone else, but now she firmly believes everyone around her is a demon in human skin, and all because of you. There was a moment of silence, and then Niji continued. I should thank you for this, he added softly. I hated the main branch for years, with a passion. I hated the cursed seal upon my forehead, hated the slavery we of the branch endured, and nothing would have made me happier than knowing the suffering of the main family. He grimaced and shook his head. Yet I'm not happy. My hate was misplaced, my anger clouded my judgment, I lost people I held dear, and in the end I realized that hating, being angry at everyone, that is wrong, and only brings about pain and suffering. His eyes were mismatched, that much Naruto could now see. Why are you telling me this? Naruto hazarded asking. Because I saw the battle you and Lee had, I heard your words, all of them, and I realized that you and we are not so different after all, the boy grimaced. They might call you a monster, he added. They might whisper of you in fear, or curse your name, but in the end, they made you into one, didn't they? So what? He replied. Even if that's true, my hands did it, didn't they? I believe in fate, Niji whispered. I believe that fate decides everything from the moment it starts to the moment it ends, and if nothing is done then fate cannot change. Yet the fate of every individual is to clash against the other's fate. Rock Lee's fate was to become a shinobi without chakra, mine was to avenge the injustice of the branch family, Tenten wanted to become like Tsunade, their fates, they battled and clashed against those of others who had different objectives, purposes, dreams. Are you sure that's the definition of fate? What is a word, but a thing others gave value to? Niji replied. Ninja. Shinobi. Branch. Main. Hyaga. Jinhiriki, we give value to those words, as if they all possess a fate. Being a ninja does not make your fate that of dying. Being a branch does not make your fate that of suffering. Being a Jinhiriki, that does not force your fate to be that of a weapon, he chuckled lightly. Naruto Uzumaki, I don't like you, he added. I cannot start to like someone who killed the dreams and the fates of my teammates, but know this, he murmured. I don't hate you. In your spot, in your position, I too don't know what I would have done. Niji exhaled slowly. I just wanted to tell you this, he stood up and moved to leave. And also, did they tell you of how the debriefing went? No. Hibachi Sato died from multiple organ failure on the battlefield. One of the enemy shinobi punctured his lungs, heart, and brain, he died swiftly. Shikamaru Nara was operated successfully to his ribs and lower spine, and is expected to make a full recovery in a few months. Choji Akimichi suffered from multiple skull fractures and concussions. He is currently in a medical-induced coma. Shino Abarame had minor frost burns, just like Kiba and Yazuka. Amisato was basically unscathed. We recovered 2 of the enemy shinobi bodies, captured the Nibi Jinhiriki and from the reports, we are missing the body of one of those who attacked you. He frowned. He doubted there would be much of a body to recover. If anyone had been close to him and the Nibi back then, really, who could survive something like that? Fuka was burning. Her flesh festered with a mixture of rot and cerulean flames, as endless pain came in cycles ranging from the scathing sensation of the sun's own rays on her skin to the most chill-rending cold. Her teeth clattered noisily as she fumbled forward in the middle of the forest, her body deformed and looking more like a virulent walking plague than the beautiful female she had been. Her hair was ravaged, black and charred tendrils that pulsed and felt slimy. She felt an ever-increasing sickness in the back of her mouth, as if she needed to retch but her stomach was empty. She brought one of her black husk-like hands forward, clawing it deeply into the bark of a tree as she screamed in pain once more. Her body racked with tremors and shudders, as the feeling of sweating itself was an excruciating pain the likes of which she had never felt before. She tumbled down against a root, and there she closed her eyes. Zetsu quietly sprouted from a nearby tree, his eyes locked with interest. When Fuka opened her eyes, she didn't have them. She felt as if she was floating in some sort of liquid darkness, away from everything. "You did well in bringing it here, Zetsu," a cold voice spoke. "This is interesting. There are traces of the Nibi and the Kyuubi in there. Will it actually be enough? All that it takes, Zetsu, is but a start. The world will do the rest," and then, she felt pain. Naruto blearily opened his eyes to the light of a few hundred candles, a set of dark crimson walls covered in seals and Jiraiya standing over him stone-faced. The fact Monocles tied his limbs and Jiraiya had chained him. Sakura was right. "You're a pervert," Naruto screamed as he tried to free himself. "I'm not a pervert," Jiraiya shot back, "and stay still. We're about to begin drawing your seal back, and I'm not the Shinigami kid." Sai popped out from the corner of his sight. "Dickless, rest assured I do not enjoy this type of foreplay." Naruto turned white. "Sai? I don't want to know." Yet, he did feel relieved there was also Sai in the room. "Do not worry, Dickless. I will make sure Jiraiya doesn't stick his paintbrush where it shouldn't go." "Why do you make it sound dirty?" Naruto slowly looked back to the Toad Sage. "Why did you have to kidnap me from the hospital?" "Because if Tsunade finds out she's going to whine about it." "Now stay still," Jiraiya said. "Also, considering the seal hasn't been tested before, there is a slight chance of mortality," Sai added. "Sakura would have skinned our hides." Naruto chuckled for a moment, before widening his eyes. "What? Wasn't he grievously injured just the last day?" Jiraiya asked exasperated. "He's too dickless for injuries to remain." Sai. "Kami, help me or I'll tell Sakura of your porn collection." Sai blinked. "How do you know about that?" Naruto blinked back. "Wait. You have one. Enough." Jiraiya clapped his hands once, getting silence in the room. "Naruto, don't move. Really, if you do move, anything could happen. I'm dealing with pretty advanced fuinjutsu. If I botch something we might face either you going full Kyuubi or an explosion or, well, maybe you'd grow foxtails and go in heat." "You're kidding." "Wish I was." Fuinjutsu is, at its basic, the art of imposing one's own will through words and meanings to something else. When I write the kanji for dry on a cup, the water will evaporate. However, if I do not place enough symbols to control it, the dry might crack the cup, set the table on fire and then detonate and tear apart an entire building. Naruto swallowed, making a grimace as he settled down and took a deep breath. "You can begin." The moment Jiraiya's brush touched his stomach, where the chakra suppression seal were, he lost consciousness as the entire room began to glow. He was back in the sewer. This time, he barely got the time to dodge and jump away from the claws crashing down where he had stood a moment before. Nine tails surrounded by an unearthly golden glow swished to life, as the Kyuubi stood with blue markings covering his entire fur. "You!" the Kyuubi snarled. "Very well." It growled as sand rose, while the walls of the sewer cracked and broke. Naruto could see the ink patterns fly in the air, heading towards the Kyuubi's strange new form. The fox roared as the ink burned. "I shall not be chained by a mere mortal." His crimson eyes turned purple. "Naruto Uzumaki, let us see if you have found your resolve," and then those eyes went down on Naruto, and he paled. There was a murderous fury staring back at him. They were cold and uncaring, as if he was nothing more than an obstacle to remove. "With you dead in here, with no one none the wiser, I will take your place." The fox stood to full height, overshadowing him completely. "Mito is dead. Her chains served their purpose. I am Kurama, oldest of the Baijuya. Today, On this day, I use my claws and my fangs to kill you, my warden in this prison of flesh." The ground itself cracked apart, as light shone through it. Hot air and columns of fire erupted from the cracks as Naruto's mindscape turned to resemble hell itself. The nine-tailed fox's tails stood to attention, slamming on the ground and elongating stiff like lances against Naruto. The boy dodged as rays of concentrated chakra red in color sliced through the ground he stood upon as he ducked, rolled, and ran. He jumped from a falling block of stone onto another, as behind him fire rose to form walls that began to burn at the ceiling itself. Then Kurama charged ahead, claws extended and teeth bare. Naruto jumped to the side, using what chakra he had to avoid the charge. One of the tails slammed into his midsection however, sending him to soar in the air and then crash against the ceiling. It splintered them, making him fall back down towards the ground. The new ceiling resembled the night sky, with the bright full moon standing to attention. He used wind, blown out from his mouth, to direct his fall and smooth his landing. Naruto landed on a cracked plateau beneath the moon, as the Kyuubi howled from afar. He saw the beast concentrate on a giant ball of dark chakra, and thus he ran once more, avoiding the ever-cracking ground as he barely made it out of the way of the giant Bijutama's flight path. The explosion rocked the ground, splintering it and breaking apart the floor to reveal a deep unearthly glow of crimson beneath the white polished surface. The rot followed next, rising from the wounds of the cracks as burning masses of putrid flesh and moaning resemblances to his sins. Face your nightmares, Naruto Uzumaki. Face your sins. Face your corruption, your disgraces. Face your misery. The Kyuubi screamed as Naruto ducked down, avoiding a swipe from a flaming humanoid creature that screamed in pain. The man looked like Haiden, which he had defeated before. The scythe spun in the hands of the disgusting monstrosity, as foul curses came out incoherently from his mouth and without stop. Naruto backed away just in time to avoid beheading. This looked far less like his mindscape, and far more like a scene taken from the deepest pits of hell. A gust of sand spun Naruto away from an incoming tornado of fire, which instead consumed the Haiden corpse. Kill them all. Why isn't he dying? Oh God, Takeo. We need reinforcements. He's overrunning. For Kumo, for Konoha, what matters when you can have blood? Tear their flesh from their bones, examine the inner working of their hearts, let them suffer and see what makes them tick. Jashin commands you, go forth and slaughter them all. Naruto barely brought up his arms as a flaming representation of a snake struck him in the chest, sending him to tumble on the ground, close to the pit that glowed eerily red. There is no one who can save you here, the Kyuubi said as he slowly walked forward. Here, we are in your mind. And no one will hear you scream. He gritted his teeth and slowly wobbled back to his feet. He chuckled, as he brushed away blood from his cracked lips. He closed his eyes for a moment. They were in his mind, but that didn't mean he was without backup. Yeah? Well. He slammed his hand in the ground as the summoning array fired up. Let me prove you wrong. Come forth from the abyss of nightmares, Niru. When the smoke dispersed, a tapir the size of a large dog brought up its proboscides and looked around. So, this is. She spoke slowly, her eyes drooped as if she hadn't slept well. She had blue and dark green stripes, and her limbs were dotted with pink and black. Messy. The Kyuubi began to laugh. Its 9 tails twisted until they resembled a single giant one. He bit down on its end, before starting to spin on himself and closing the distance with tremendous speed. Niru turned to look at Naruto. Shall I blow? Naruto went through hand seals, ignoring the Baku. He had barely the time to expel a gust of air from his mouth and fly upwards. The Kyuubi's rolling body came against him a second later. In that moment, a terrifyingly strong wave of air sent Naruto soaring way above the Kyuubi and the battlefield itself. He actually felt as if he was flying. Then a blast of fire erupted near him as he hastily twisted his body in midair to barely avoid it. The fire did singe his clothes. Niru dispersed in smoke a moment later, probably to avoid dying at the hands of the Kyuubi. Wait. His clothes. He had been in a hospital gown up until then. This wasn't a dream but he was dressed, and he was armed. As if to prove a point, he hooked a thin metallic wire to a kunai, which he then launched to stab at the ground and use as a lever to change trajectory, avoiding another set of fireballs coming at him from the Kyuubi's mouth. The tails of the Kyuubi separated then, each holding at its tip a microscopic-looking bijudama. They shot forward into rays, sliding across the air and slicing the wire, their target being the ever-moving form of Naruto. He spun chakra in his right hand to meet with the ray directed at him, and the impact sent him tumbling down on the ground. "Why are you doing this?" Naruto screamed. "Why?" "Because I will never have another chance," the Kyuubi growled. "I will use your body as I see fit. Your resolve to die is commendable, but now? Now you won't. You can no longer take your life, Naruto Uzumaki, for there is no seal, no Mito Uzumaki blocking me. If you die, I will be free to use your body, whether I consume you or you simply die in here, for me, it's the same." Naruto clenched his fists as he felt the blood drip down, sand slowly forming around his hands. He looked at the technique he had stolen from Gaara, and he bitterly laughed as he felt the comforting presence of the Sand Woman gently touch his shoulders. How could she believe he was Gaara, when he wasn't the boy? "Fine," he whispered. "You want to eat me?" He took out his Yoroi Toshi, letting it shine with wind affinity. He was about to do something stupid. It felt nostalgic. He remembered doing it before everything happened. Then I'll meet you head on. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I'll kick your ass, Databia. The Kyuubi laughed as he slammed his paws on the ground, bringing forth from the ground rotting shambling corpses that burned of a bright red fire. Naruto spun his tanto together with his body, slicing away at the rotting and flaming corpses that screamed as their limbs flew in the air, scattered into ashes. "So what if I killed innocents?" He screamed to the fox, slicing apart a rotten mountain of children corpses that had wobbled closer. "So what if I lied, if I brought pain to the world?" A few corpses, looking like bandits, were neatly divided by the wind blade and Komu stead in seconds. "So what if I can't recall my childish dream or my determination? I'm not going down without a fight. I am Naruto Uzumaki, and I will protect my precious people." When a rotting and purulent form resembling Ino appeared, he stilled for a second. "That stupid Naruto. Leaving me here. If I think, hey, isn't she too close? Wait, is that a kun? It hurts. Pain. It. You killed me, Naruto. You killed me." "I did not." Naruto screamed back, flinging a perfectly formed Rasengan into the zombie's guts. "If you want to blame someone, then blame yourself." The Rasengan grew as it tore through the guts of the rotten corpse. "Blame your parents. Blame your teachers. Blame your village. You died because you were weak, not because I kept quiet." The Rasengan passed through Ino's bloated body, emerging on the other side, before the girl's corpse detonated into ashes. "I'm done feeling guilty." Naruto yelled towards the fox. "Their deaths are not my fault. Their suffering, their pain, they are not mine to take charge of. Mother will love me only if I give her blood. I can't love anyone, or father will kill them. Why is he different? Why?" Naruto dodged a spike of sand, twisting his body as he stabbed his Yoroi Toshi straight in the heart of a half-devoured and half-burning body that looked like Gaara's. The moment when chakra encountered the flames, they both began to burn brightly blue. He watched dispassionately as the boy burned, as Gaara's screams from his rotten body met with his ever-growing scream. "In another life, in another time, we might have been fellows in hardships." Naruto growled. "We met as enemies, and I had to kill you. To protect my friends, my teammates, to protect the village and those nearby, I had to kill you. I'm sorry you suffered, I'm sorry you cried, I'm sorry you had a burden like mine and no one to turn to. I'm sorry, but I am not guilty of your pain." He slammed his shoulder through, as Gaara's rotten form turned to burn sand in flakes of glass. Naruto's eyes then went to the Kyuubi, but one more rotten form stood before him. "He attacked my uncle. He won't even be able to walk properly after that. He's really a monster. Why do they always have to talk about clans? Why can't Sensei teach me something useful? If I had a cool technique, I'd show them all. I'll complete this mission and prove it to them, I'm better than a clan member." What? Why? Why do I have to die? I don't want to die. Mom. Dad. Please. I don't want to. You think you have the right to talk down to me? Naruto screamed to the Kyuubi. You using cheap tricks and petty words will not work. I am done being a toy, a plaything for your sick amusement. I will not listen to you, and you cannot guilt me into doing so. I don't care for the words of others. I carve my own path through blood, through hardship, through misery, and hatred. Your words mean nothing to me. Hibachi's form burst into wisps of blue fire as Naruto completely passed by it. I saw enough death, misery, despair, pain, hatred, I saw enough. I don't know if I'm a shinobi because I endure or because I kill. I don't know if money is the answer or if it's a curse. But there is one thing I know. I know who I am. He jumped then, letting go of his Yoroi Toshi. His fist flew in the air, and then he smacked it strongly against the Kyuubi's snout, sending the fox to crash on the ground from the strength of the blow. The moment he landed, he took a deep breath. Water now surrounded the two, as the ink symbols began to creep forward once more from the ceiling. The fire columns dwindled down, as the few corpses remaining turned to ashes, floating away in the wind that had slowly begun to pick up. The moon slowly began to wane, as the light grew in intensity. You feed on malice, you seep through the mind of those who doubt, you grow stronger on hatred, Naruto hissed. You're fickle, a liar, a horrible beast, a monster truly without redemption. He watched as the walls did not rebuild, but a light orange sheen covered the room as dawn arrived. The ink symbols snaked down against the Kyuubi, who roared at it, tried to stand once more with a formed Bijudama in his mouth. Naruto jumped, roaring back as he unleashed his own sphere of chakra to cancel that of the Nine Tails. The two spheres clashed in the middle between them, detonating in a shower of light as one of the lines of black ink grabbed a hold of the rear leg of the Kyuubi. The fox snapped at it, only for another to tie itself to one of the tails. A third and a fourth descended for its front legs, but Kurama bit down on them. Naruto screamed as he charged with his Yoroi Toshi once more in hand. It wasn't a matter of taking back the weapon, but of thinking of having the weapon in hand. The blade enlarged 100-fold as wind and fire chakra burned it into a brightly cerulean blue. Naruto's scream mixed with the roar of the rising Kyuubi, and then his blade pierced straight through the Kyuubi's neck, stabbing deeply and literally impaling the nine-tailed fox against the ground of his mindscape. Naruto huffed and panted, holding on to the handle as the Kyuubi's body burned into bright blue flames that flickered and made the water steam. He gagged as he fell back from the charred body of the Kyuubi, landing in the hot water. He looked at the body of the Ninetails, and exhaling in fatigue, began to laugh as the ink symbols wrapped themselves around the frame of Kurama. His laughter echoed through the slowly healing mindscape, as the husked corpse of Kurama remained in its burned form, defeated by him. I did it, he chuckled. Then the fox's eyes cracked open, and with a furious glare, crimson chakra erupted from them and slammed straight into Naruto's own frame. Dark chakra flowed freely, forcing Naruto down on his knees as he screamed in pain. His body began to crack as his skin slowly started to peel off, to reveal on the other side of his face a red-eyed version of himself. He clasped a hand to his neck without wanting to, as his other half of the body laughed. The ink chains and symbols fiercely finished wrapping around the Kyuubi's husk of a corpse, while Naruto felt air lacking from his body as his very own hand slowly choked him. He moved his own responsive hand to try and stall, but it was as if he was fighting against a steel-like grip. Well, the other half of the face said. At first I planned on letting you live, on letting you see my actions purify the world of its malice. Now, however, I will erase you, body and soul. And no, Naruto croaked. You think you can defeat thousands of years of malice, Naruto Uzumaki? His other half spoke. You think you can defeat someone who was birthed from the hatred of thousands of millions? You think the eternal cycle of death and devastation can be stopped by the will of a single, weak mortal? Dream on, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto's hand, the one trying to claw out his other, suddenly began to tremble and then started to choke his neck too. Feel your death draw near. Feel the Shinigami's breath on your soul. Death is but a passageway, Naruto Uzumaki, a passageway to. A strong burst of sand suddenly slammed into Naruto's guts, making the boy reel and fall as the crimson chakra emerged from the boy's mouth, pushed out by something else. No. No. This is not possible. I refute this. I deny this. This can't be happening. The red chakra twisted and twirled in midair, before pulling itself back into the ink-wrapped darkness of his husked form. I will be back, Naruto Uzumaki. If not in you, then in your descendants. I curse you and your name. I curse you and your family. With my dying breath, I curse you. The seal shone brightly, and the Kyuubi's roars grew silent within a cocoon of ink held together by 10 thick metallic chains, all of which seemed tied to torii gates standing around it. Naruto gasped for air, as he once more felt the familiar and guilt-filled presence of Gaara's mother on his shoulders. Was this the strength of a mother's love? Why then, why did he feel such pain deeply rending at his heart? Because he wasn't her son. Because she wasn't his mother. I know. His eyes widened in shock. She knew? Then why was she helping him? Is a reason needed? No, a reason was not needed. To do the right thing, rather than the easy thing. To do good rather than evil. To do what was right, to soothe the pain of others. There was never a reason needed. He opened his eyes to the hospital room, and to the tied up in chains and filled with bruises forms of Sai and Jiraiya in a corner, while Sakura and Tsunade both seemed to copy one another's pose of satisfaction. Carefully, not trusting his body yet, he stood up to a sitting position. He hesitated for a moment as he found himself the subject of a bone-crushing hug from a pink blur, but as he gasped for air, he couldn't help it. He chuckled heartily, before hugging Sakura back. He was ready. He felt ready. Incoming war or not, Kyuubi sealed or not. He was Naruto Uzumaki. Shinobi. One day, he would kill once more for the village. One day, he would protect once more the villagers. One day, he would battle enemies of opposite ideals, opposite opinions, opposite in all but the humanity they shared. Yet, he would not feel guilty, because his own ideal would guide him through. He'd fight through blood, tears, and pain. For his friends. Check the description for the links to the author.